Story one. From the moment I stumbled upon that strange story on the internet, nothing was the same. I remember that night. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just clicking through pages, looking for random stuff. I often wandered into those dark corners of the web where people discuss dreams, experimental fiction, or conspiracy theories. Pages that usually have two or three comments and no one else. It was like an escape from reality, from everything that was troubling me. I was tired, moving around the internet like a ghost, without any particular goal, just to distract myself. But then everything changed. I don't remember what exactly attracted me. It wasn't some loud headline or an enticing image, like on other pages. No, it was just another post. I thought it was probably another weird sci-fi story, but something subconsciously caught my attention at that moment. I don't even know why. I started reading and couldn't tear myself away. This was not an ordinary story. A woman named Helena, working with artificial intelligence in some hidden laboratory complex. At first glance, everything seemed like a typical sci-fi plot. But the further I read, the more it all began to go beyond the ordinary. Mysteries began to accumulate. Digital pyramids, models that include consciousnesses, echoes, recursion. Something is collapsing, but what exactly was unclear. At first, I thought it was just fiction, someone's stupid attempt to create something unimaginable. But then I noticed something strange. Strange repeating phrases, extra numbers that didn't make sense. Some words seemed to be directed specifically at me. I began to torment myself with this thought, but I couldn't throw it away. Then I came across a moment that immediately caught me. It was like a transcript of a 911 call, but not quite a normal one. Voices, a conversation that was clearly out of time. Operator: hello, we deal with spiritual crises. How are you today? Helena: I'm lost. I don't understand anything. Have I been hacked? Has reality broken down? I feel like a chess piece, the queen, but I've already lost the game. Operator: don't worry, we're here to help. Do you feel chaos in your soul? Helena: I feel like I'm falling, not floating, falling, but I can't see the end. Everything is dark, flashes of red. I don't understand. Can you help me? Operator: I understand. It's normal to feel overwhelmed when reality begins to distort. Let's ground this experience together. When I finished reading this passage, I felt a chill run down my spine. Something deep inside me shifted. It was somehow familiar. I couldn't explain why, but these words seemed very close to me, as if I had heard them before. It wasn't just the thrill of reading, it was something more. I couldn't forget these lines, even though logic dictated that they had nothing to do with me. I tried to find that post again. I saved the page, checked my browser history, but the post was gone. Nothing. As if it had never existed. I tried to search for phrases I remembered, sort through the quotes, but there was no trace. It was all gone, as if it had never existed. After that, the problem started. Every night at the same time, 3:33 in the morning, I would wake up. And it wasn't a coincidence. I could never remember how I fell asleep, but my alarm always rang at 3:33. At first, I didn't pay attention to it. Coincidence, I thought, but after a couple of nights it became too obvious. I even tried writing down my dreams to understand what was happening to me. Sometimes I would wake up feeling like something invisible was looking at me, like I was under intense scrutiny. It was a strange and disturbing feeling, like my life on some level was no longer my own. I started keeping a dream diary. Sometimes everything seemed normal, and sometimes it was unbearably strange. Repeating symbols, triangles, circles, words I couldn't forget. The signal is already inside you. I wrote down these strange phrases, but they haunted me. Sometimes I thought they meant something, but I couldn't figure out what it was. And then something even more disturbing happened. I was on a work call. Everything was normal, until I blinked. Just for a moment, for a few seconds. When I looked back up at the screen, I saw that my Notes app was open. I hadn't even touched my phone, but there it was. Machine won't work. I froze, staring at the screen. I hadn't written that. I couldn't even figure out what the message was. I started checking my device just in case, but I couldn't find anything suspicious. From that moment on, something in my life changed. I couldn't ignore these events any longer. Reality started to fall apart, and I didn't know what to do with it. I tried to calm myself down, thinking it was just stress or a coincidence. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was controlling me, something beyond my control, something that had chosen me. And this story, this strange story, would not let me go until I figured out why. Every night, as soon as the clock touches 3:33, I wake up. This time has become unbearably familiar, and every time I open my eyes, I get a strange feeling that something is wrong. I don't know why this happens, but I'm sure there is a connection with that post I read. Night after night, I wake up at this same time, and each time it becomes more and more difficult for me to separate reality from what is happening in my dreams. In addition, the sensations after waking up become more and more powerful and clear, as if I am living in some strange dream where the world around me does not make sense. It was not just anxiety, it was something more powerful than normal stress. I began to notice that even during the day, everything seems slightly distorted. When I work or talk to someone, I sometimes catch myself that my thoughts go in some parallel directions. It's not just forgetfulness. It's like I'm ripping out chunks of my reality and replacing them with something completely different. The dream journal I started keeping quickly filled up with strange entries. Every time I woke up, I tried to remember what exactly was happening in my dreams. I wrote down symbols, phrases that I heard, and it all came together to form a strange pattern. Triangles and circles were among the recurring themes. Sometimes I would wake up with the feeling that someone was whispering in my ear, but the words did not reach my consciousness. It was as if I heard them, but they disappeared as soon as I tried to catch them. One of the phrases that I kept writing down was, "The signal is already inside you." These words would not leave me, and the more I tried to understand their meaning, the more I felt that this was not just a dream. It was something bigger, something important. One day I decided to go back to the post that had caused all this. I just couldn't ignore the feeling that I was missing something, something important. But just like before, the post was gone. I reread everything I could find, but there was no trace of it. It was as if it had never existed. I began to wonder if I was going crazy. Maybe this was all just a product of my fatigue and stress. But even with these thoughts, deep down I knew I couldn't stop. Soon other strange things started happening. At work one day, during a routine call, I blinked. And as soon as I opened my eyes again, there was something written on my phone screen that I definitely didn't write. "The machine won't work." The message didn't make sense. I tried to remember what could have caused it, but I couldn't. I hadn't even touched the phone. How could it have appeared there? I tried to find an explanation for it, but it didn't come. It felt like I was connected to something that was leaving messages for me, and every time I tried to ignore them, they became brighter and more obvious. And then it happened again. I woke up at 3:33 like always, and this time it was different. I felt something vibrating in the room, as if the whole world around me was under tension. I couldn't understand what exactly was happening. There was uncertainty in the air, like something invisible was trying to pull me back into this nightmare. At some point, I heard a whisper, the same one that sounded in my dreams. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew they were for me. This was not just a coincidence. It was a signal that could not be ignored. I kept thinking about what could have happened, how I ended up in this position. It was not simple stress or fatigue. I tried to cope with it, but it was impossible to shake off the feeling that something had chosen me. It was as if everything that was happening for me, with a purpose. And that purpose was not clear. I needed to understand what was happening, or I would go crazy. Everything I was reading, everything I was experiencing, it couldn't just be a dream. I was sure that I wasn't alone, that someone else was going through the same thing. And if this story resonated with someone else, I needed to know. I can't be alone in this. So I'm writing this here, in case someone knows what I'm going through. Now I need answers. Why me? Why am I trapped in this? And what the hell do these symbols and messages mean, coming to me like shadows hidden in the corners of my mind? All of this makes me feel like the world around me is ceasing to be what it once was. And I can't figure out when this process will start to destroy everything I've ever known about reality. Things got even worse when I noticed that the world was starting to blur. At first, it was small details like subtle changes in the environment that I just couldn't explain. Maybe it was just fatigue or the stress that had been building up over time. But the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like these were more than just coincidences. You know when something feels familiar, but you can't quite place where it came from? That's how I'd been feeling for the past few days. Every morning I'd wake up and before I could tear my eyes away from the ceiling, I'd know that I'd woken up at 3:33 again. It was like time had become a fixed point that kept repeating itself, like a cycle with no escape. I tried to find meaning in these numbers. Maybe they were just a coincidence, but no, they were starting to pierce me like a bolt of energy, causing my body to react to them intuitively. This time I decided not to just look at my phone and write down what was happening. I started trying to control myself, to look for any clues in this nightmare. I opened my dream diary again. There were already many strange phrases written there that I couldn't understand, but one of them, the one I always wrote down, became especially disturbing. The signal is already inside you. I knew it was connected to that post. It couldn't be a coincidence. Someone wrote it for me. Someone knew what I would be looking for. Then one evening, when I was sitting in front of the monitor, I suddenly felt a strange movement of air in the room. It was so sharp that I didn't even have time to react. My gaze lingered on the screen, and I noticed that the cursor was moving on its own across the page. I didn't touch the mouse, but it kept moving until it stopped on one of the sentences in the text. My gaze froze. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was the line I'd read in the post about Helena. It said, "You've read it. Now you must decide." I jerked away from the screen, as if his words would somehow hurt me. But it didn't matter anymore. I knew it wasn't just text, it was a signal, and I couldn't ignore what was happening any longer. The problem wasn't just that I could see the text. The problem was that no matter what I did, it kept coming to me. It was like a net I couldn't break. I could feel it tightening around me, the threads growing tighter with each passing day. That's when I realized this wasn't just a fluke. I wasn't looking for something like this. I wasn't expecting to find it. But I was in the middle of something much bigger. This was a game, and I was a part of it. But who was it that was moving all these threads? And what the hell was I supposed to solve? Maybe I had simply lost control, and there was no room in my mind for common sense. But I kept searching. I opened the page again to where it all began, and as soon as I started reading, I realized that these were not just words. This was a real labyrinth, and every choice I made led me further into this world that I could not understand. But I could not stop. It was a necessity, the knowledge that I had to get to the end. And if this was all just part of some test, then I could not give up. Every time I tried to leave, something in this world pulled me back, and I could not escape my role. But I did not know who or what was controlling this process. And if all this was not just a dream, not just an experience, then what awaited me next? The dark corners of my reality began to come alive, and I could not understand when I would want to close my eyes again. Yesterday, things got even worse. I woke up at 3:33 a.m. as usual, and although I had long since gotten used to this time, the feeling was much more intense. It was as if I was standing on the edge between two worlds, one of which was devouring me, and the other was forcing me to stay in reality. My body was in a cold sweat, and my heart was beating like crazy. I knew that this was not just a coincidence. Something was happening, and I could not escape it. I don't know what exactly, but everything around me was becoming too familiar. Every morning I see the same thing. When I open my eyes, the world seems to freeze for a moment, as if the universe itself is waiting for me to make my next move. I am stuck in this loop where time has no meaning, but every moment seems critical. During the day, I tried to ignore what was happening. Work calls, routine, external noises. All this helped not to think about what happened at night. But as soon as I close my eyes, the same thoughts come again. Triangles, circles, and this phrase, "The signal is already inside you." All this penetrates my blood, my body. I can't ignore it. I can't get it out of my head. But what is it? What does it mean? Every time I turn to it, I feel like I'm losing myself a little more. I know that the more I search, the more this world will swallow me up. But what can I do? I have to understand what's happening, Otherwise, I will collapse under the weight of this uncertainty. That evening, I opened my notes again, and the words, "the machine won't work," appeared on the screen. I looked at it like a warning. Again, I hadn't written this. I hadn't even touched the phone. And yet the words were stuck in my mind like nails, like something or someone was trying to warn me. What if this was all real? What if I really was lost and this was my last chance to find my way out? With each passing day, this feeling became more and more acute. I began to doubt that I was even in reality anymore. Sometimes I feel like I'm living in a parallel universe, and what I see is just a reflection of the reality where I'm destined to stay forever. I'm constantly looking for signs that this isn't just a game of my mind. But the more I look, the more I feel like I'm becoming a part of something much bigger than I could ever imagine. As I lay in the darkness, feeling that strange pressure on my mind again, it occurred to me, what if I never get out of this? What if I can no longer return to the world that was before? Maybe this world I had fallen into had not just taken my reality. It had taken my soul, and now I could do nothing about it. That night I heard the whisper again, so quiet I could barely make out the words. "You have read it. Now you must decide." I didn't know who or what was speaking, but it became clear to me that this was not just a coincidence. This was not a dream. This was not just a conspiracy or a mirage. This was reality, and this reality was part of something far more sinister. When I opened my eyes, it was clear to me that something was watching me. I could feel it on my skin, inside and out. It was more than fear. It was a feeling of being part of something beyond my control. And despite my best efforts to make sense of what was happening, I knew I was only at the tip of the iceberg. The rest of it was hidden from me. What if I couldn't get out? What if I became another lost part of this world? All I could do was fight it. I kept reading, kept searching, but every time I tried to find some truth, I seemed unable to move forward. The words changed. The symbols became more confusing. My nights became stranger. I wasn't sure I could stay in this world much longer, and yet I had to know what would happen next. Every night when I wake up at 3:33, I get the feeling that I'm not alone in my room. I feel as if someone is standing next to me, watching my every move, and I can't shake it. There's a strange anxiety inside me that won't let me rest. I don't know what's happening anymore. Reality blurs over and over again, and I lose the line between what was and what has become. Every time I close my eyes, I find myself in a different place. Sometimes it's the same place, where I stand at a crossroads, surrounded by shadows, but other times it's a place I can't describe in words. It scares me and attracts me at the same time. I can't control where this world takes me, and every step I take feels like an attempt to escape the unknown. At work, as usual, I am faced with the fact that I will not tell anyone about what is happening. It is difficult to explain to others that you have begun to doubt reality itself when you yourself cannot understand what is happening. Sometimes they tell me that I need to rest, but how can you rest when every night you wake up in this nightmare where reality is not yours? I try to focus on work, on tasks, but it is all like dust in the wind. I can't help but think about what was said in the posts I read, and these words become a part of me. I can't get rid of the thought that I was once in this place, in this world, where everything has lost its meaning. One day when I was back in my office, I noticed something strange. The Notes app opened by itself again, and a new message appeared on the screen. This time it was short. "You can't leave." I felt a chill run down my spine. I hadn't even touched my phone, but those words were there again, as if they were watching my every move. I tried to find an answer to this question, trying to figure out what this phrase meant. I needed to know what was going on, but every time I tried to look deeper, the world became even blurrier. I began to feel myself being pulled towards these messages. Each new word I received made me feel as if I was becoming part of this strange world that was capturing me. I opened the page with the post again, hoping to find some kind of clue. And then I saw it. Messages that seemed to be written for me. Each line was like an answer to my own thoughts. Each word seemed directed directly at me. And in that moment I realized I was no longer just an observer. I had become part of this story. The words I was reading were not just a story. They were not just text. They were something much more. That night I woke up again at 3:33, And when I opened my eyes, everything around me seemed to have changed. I felt that presence again, that feeling of being watched. I saw silhouettes, shadows that slid around corners, and a sound that came from somewhere outside like a whisper that would not stop. I realized that this was not just a dream. This was not just an experience. This was something more, something that now had me in its power, and I could not get out of it. I was afraid that one day I would wake up and the world would not be the same. What if I was stuck in this place forever? What if this world swallowed me up and would not let me go? I began to doubt reality more and more. Everything around me seemed like an illusion, and I could not understand where my life ended and this strange universe that never stopped haunting me began. And perhaps I would never be able to return. Story 2M. The 01. I don't believe in ghosts, but sometimes when I feel lonely or too quiet, the thought seems to creep into my mind. It comes as if by accident, when the dark shadows on the walls begin to move and the whispers of the night become a little louder. But this story is not about my doubts. It is a truth that will probably never give me peace. It is a story about the house where I spent a lot of time as a teenager, and where there was something that I still cannot explain. My girlfriend at the time lived in one of the strangest houses I had ever seen. It was an old stone farmhouse in a small village in the northeast of England. If you imagine a place where everything seems frozen in time, this village was exactly that. It had just 12 houses and a pub perched on a hillside. And right in the middle of it all was this house, a stately building that was home to my ex-boyfriend, who I dated between the ages of 16 and 20. The house she lived in was on top of a hill, and although it was one of the oldest buildings in the area, it seemed as if time had forgotten it. It wasn't just old, it was a monster among the trees, a big stone box with high ceilings, huge windows, and many dark corners where shadows lurked. The house had been built many years ago, and when the farming went away, it had been sold. In the early 20th century, it had been divided into two houses for the miners who lived in the area at the time. Later, when the mines closed and the people moved away, her parents bought the two houses with the intention of joining them together to create one large home. This was no ordinary restoration. The work had been going on for decades, and by the time I began meeting her, the house was in the process of being restored, but far from finished. Locals liked to tell stories about how the house was tied to old stories, rumors of tragedies that had befallen it. They said that events had once taken place here that had left traces that had not disappeared, even after centuries. And all this history began with the land on which the house stood, land steeped in the tragedies of miners and their failures in the search for coal. Every time I visited the house, it became increasingly difficult to ignore its strange atmosphere. Maybe it was the fact that the locals repeated the stories of ghosts and terrible events so often, or maybe it was the house itself, its character conveyed in every brick, every window, every creaking door. As a teenager, it was hard for me to take any of it seriously. Ghosts, poltergeists, and all the rest of it, I didn't believe in. But there was something about the house that made me feel like an outsider. Maybe it was the old wooden floors that always creaked underfoot, or the stairs that suddenly sighed, as if they knew who was walking on them. And yet, I tried to ignore it. The girl I was dating was proud of living in such a house. In fact, she wasn't as sure of her pride as she would have liked. Although she admitted to me sometimes, she was scared at night. She said she heard strange sounds, footsteps in the attic, rustling, as if someone was moving something, although no one was home. Her older brother claimed to have seen a strange shadow moving behind his bedroom door, right under the hatch that led to the attic. This place wasn't just old, it was mystical. But despite all these oddities, I was skeptical. I knew that the atmosphere of the place, its history and rumors of ghosts influenced my perception. We always joked about ghosts, as if it was part of the local culture. All these stories sometimes seemed so ridiculous that I did not want to believe them. Of course, I also thought that I heard strange sounds, but I always found an explanation for them. Old wooden beams, wind, uneven floors, or something like that. Sometimes when the house was empty, it gave me the opportunity to stay for a few nights. My girlfriend was often alone, as her parents were away at sporting events. At first, it was a little scary, being alone in such a big house, especially at night. I didn't like the sounds of the night, especially when they seemed too distinct in the silence. But then I got used to it, And although it was a little creepy, I began to feel relatively calm. The house seemed to have its own character, and despite all the rumors, I didn't worry about them too much. I often wondered how the locals perceived this house. They loved to tell scary stories about it. They said that something terrible had once happened in the attic, perhaps a murder or suicide. Some believed that even the ground beneath the house held old troubles. In mining towns where grief and tragedy were part of everyday life, such rumors were common. It was as if these stories became part of the history of the place, retold from generation to generation. However, to me, the house was just an old, huge building that needed a lot of work. But there was something about the house that sometimes made me feel strange. It was as old and unwelcoming as the stories I had heard. And despite my best efforts to ignore it, something about it still bothered me. I remember feeling a little strange that evening. We were sitting in the living room as usual, an old large room with high ceilings and a fireplace that was never heated. On the outside, everything was as usual. The cozy light from the table lamps, the quiet rustling of the trees outside the window. But this time, something was wrong. I couldn't say exactly what, but it felt as if the house itself was alive and watching us. "You're not yourself," she said, noticing my silence. I didn't answer right away, trying to find the words. It wasn't the first night I'd felt something strange in this house, but usually I quickly forgot about it. But this time, it was as if something ominous hung in the air, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. I stood up from my seat without saying a word. Silently, I went to the window, but it was dark there, and only the faint lights of the neighboring houses flickered in the distance. Far beyond the village was a forest that became especially ominous at dusk. I was used to these sounds, the howling of the wind, the creaking of old trees, quiet footsteps in the morning. But tonight was different. There was a heaviness in the air, and in the shadows in the corner of the room, it seemed to me that someone was standing. "You'd better go to bed. You're probably tired," she said again, trying to pour herself some tea. I nodded but couldn't bring myself to go back to my seat. Something was bothering me. Sounds that had seemed normal before, the creaking of floorboards, the distant noise from the kitchen, now felt different. It felt like someone was watching me. As strange as it sounded, I wanted to check what exactly was happening to this house, what these strange sensations were that were beginning to bother me. I told her I was going out for a minute to take a walk and didn't wait for an answer. I walked out into the hall and slowed down. Something in me at that moment was telling me, "You have to do this." It was getting colder with every step I took, even though I knew the house was warm and the fire in the fireplace was still burning. The cool air was like a warning. I walked down the long hallway to the stairs. The stairs, like the rest of the house, creaked. But at that moment, the sound seemed almost loud. I went upstairs, and at that very moment, it seemed to me that there was someone in the darkness. I knew there couldn't be anyone. My girlfriend was in the kitchen, and the whole house was empty, except for the two of us. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something hiding in the dark corners. I went to the door that led to the attic. It was closed, but the old mechanism often malfunctioned, and I expected the door to be forced open. I pulled the handle, and it slowly gave way with a distinctive creaking sound. It was dark inside, and although I knew that this space had not been used for a long time, I felt my heart stop. There was no one there, of course. I looked around the shelves, the old boxes that held things that had long been forgotten. However, the longer I stood there, the stronger this feeling became, that something was wrong here. Perhaps it was just my mind starting to lose control, but I could not understand what was causing such anxiety. Suddenly, I heard a strange sound. It was a quiet, barely audible rustling, as if someone was running through the attic. I immediately recoiled, and my heart began to beat faster. I froze, listening, but I heard nothing. Maybe it was the wind? Perhaps it was just the old beams of the house making sounds, but for some reason at that moment I could not believe these explanations. Then I felt something sliding across my face. I went into a dark corner, feeling around to find what it could be, and only then did I notice that the vents in the walls were a little more open than usual. A cool breeze was coming through, but as I later realized, that breeze was always there. What was missing was the feeling of a presence. When I returned to the room, the girl was sitting on the couch, her head down. I didn't want to scare her, but at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house wasn't as simple as I'd like to think. I didn't say a word to her about what I'd seen in the attic. At the time, it seemed to me that any words would only make my own anxiety worse. Later, when we went to bed, I suddenly realized these nights would come back. I didn't yet know that there were shadows behind this house that wouldn't go away so easily, and that this evening was just the beginning. Leaving the house in the morning, I looked at its dark windows and thought that maybe there were no ghosts here, but there was definitely something in this house, and I didn't know what it was. The morning came quietly as always. The sun's rays barely touched the ground when I woke up and felt a little strange. This night had not given me any peace, and although it was hardly possible to explain this discomfort with something logical, I felt that the house was still holding me in its shadows. I got out of bed and went to the kitchen. The girl was already there, her back turned to me when I entered. She was holding a cup in her hands but did not notice how I approached. I listened to her quiet sigh, which seemed to me even a little nervous. Perhaps it was just fatigue. She was always like this. Behind her external calmness, there were many unspoken thoughts. "Good morning," I said, trying to sound as calm as possible. She started and turned to me, a little embarrassed. Her eyes were tired, and there was a shadow of something on her face that I couldn't quite place. But what was strange was that I had known her for a long time. And this look, this little worry, was foreign to me. "Have you been awake again?" she asked, staring out the window one day, where only the shadows of the trees and a few birds flying past were visible. It was an ordinary moment in the morning, nothing out of the ordinary, but she clearly felt something was wrong. I nodded, but didn't dare tell her what exactly was bothering me. The night visions, the strange sounds, and the constant feeling of a presence, it all seemed so absurd that I didn't want to burden her with unnecessary thoughts. "Did you notice anything strange yesterday?" I asked, not entirely sure if I was answering her question. She pursed her lips and thought for a moment, as if trying to find the right words. After a few seconds, her gaze became a little more wary, and she answered, "I thought I heard strange sounds last night, but I decided that I was just imagining it." She immediately turned away and began pouring herself another cup of tea, as if trying to hide her discomfort. I couldn't understand what exactly was making her react so strangely, or why she didn't want to discuss something that clearly made us both uncomfortable. The silence between us felt heavier and heavier. "Noises," I couldn't help but ask. "What kind?" She pressed the cup to her lips, as if trying to calm herself. When she spoke, her voice was much quieter than usual. Like someone in another room or in the attic, and then silence. Like someone stopped and watched. I felt uneasy, but I said nothing. Oddly, I felt like we were both starting to avoid the topic. Even when signs of strange phenomena began to appear in the house, we both chose not to speak about them out loud. Instead, we tried to carry on normal conversations, as if nothing was happening. I went into my office where an old photograph stood on the table, a few years ago when she and I had just moved into this house. Back then, it seemed like nothing could ruin our idyll. We laughed, looked at life with optimism, and didn't believe in things like ghosts or strange sounds. I brushed the dust off the photo frame, but my gaze didn't leave the photograph. We looked happy in it, but behind that picture were already years of a relationship that hadn't always been so peaceful. More and more, I noticed that we seemed to be growing apart, not physically, but inside. This strange feeling of alienation that didn't want to go away. At that moment, I felt that strange coldness again, as if someone was standing behind me. I quickly turned around, but as expected, there was no one in the room, only emptiness. Was it all just in my head? The strange sounds at night, the feeling of a presence, the loneliness inside. It all tormented me. I wondered if it could be connected with the house or with something deeper. We sat at the table for dinner in silence. I couldn't drive away thoughts about what was happening around me. Every glance into the dark corners of the room caused a feeling of anxiety. I looked at the girl and felt sorry for her. I couldn't understand what was going on in her head, and maybe she also felt that I was moving away. "Is there something you haven't told me?" she asked suddenly, and it was like asking me to open some doors that I was not ready to open. This was the moment when everything we tried to hide finally began to come out. But I just shook my head. "Nothing," I replied, although I knew I should have said something more. I don't remember how I woke up in the morning, But at some point, I realized that I hadn't slept again. The night passed in agonizing anticipation, trying to understand what was happening around me. I wasn't prepared for what I could call psychosis or paranoia, but this feeling of emptiness, of anxiety that wouldn't leave me, was something more real than I wanted to admit. The girl was sleeping next to me. Her breathing was even, as usual, but I knew that if she knew what was going on in my head, she wouldn't be able to calm down the way she did now. I couldn't understand why her calmness didn't transmit to me, why I felt like I was in a cage, surrounded by these walls that seemed to be squeezing me. I got up to go outside. The morning was unusually quiet. Not a single sound, only the shadow of the trees swaying slightly in the wind and the light whistling breath of nature. Everything looked so peaceful, but there was something strange hidden under this silence, as if nature itself was tense. I went out into the garden and took a deep breath. The feeling of strange, incomplete peace did not go away. Questions were ringing in my head, to which I could not find answers. Why could I not get rid of this feeling of persecution? Why was this house, this corner where everything seemed so cozy and safe, now a place that I began to avoid? My eyes stopped on an old tree near the fence. It looked as if it were too old to be here. I had always noticed it, but I had never thought about what could be wrong with this tree. Now it seemed to me something alien, as if it had been standing here for too many years, as if it did not belong here. I decided to approach it. The same instinct that led me to strange places again urged me to move. As I got closer, I noticed that the tree's roots were growing unevenly. They were twisted and seemed to be covered in something that looked like a natural slime. It was too strange for me. I bent down to take a closer look, and for a moment I thought that someone was watching me. That feeling came over me again, like a shadow that could not be driven away. A sharp rustle from behind made me turn around. My heart sank, but everything was as quiet as before. I saw nothing but the swaying branches. After all, I had probably overloaded myself with this anxiety, but I could not shake the thought that something was wrong. I walked back to the house, and as soon as I opened the door, the girl was gone. I stopped. In her place, there was only an empty chair standing by the window, with her cup of tea, which was now empty. I felt anxiety growing inside me, like a kind of fear that had never been characteristic of me. Where is she? I looked around the house, checked every room. She wasn't in any of them. The panic that was beginning to grip me made my heart beat faster, and I hurried out into the garden. She wasn't on the street, nor in the garden, nor in the park near the house. I was ready to call her disappearance just another fruit of my disorder, but this fear wouldn't leave me. And suddenly I heard her voice. It was unclear, as if it was coming from far away. I turned towards the old tree. "Did you come here?" Her words were weak, as if they were struggling to escape from her. I ran in that direction, and there, by the tree, I saw her. She was sitting on the ground, hugging her knees with her hands. Her face was pale, and her eyes seemed clouded. When she saw me, her gaze became clearer. "I couldn't stay there," she said, her voice shaking. I realized that she felt this strange discomfort too, but she couldn't put it into words. We were both trapped in this house, which at first glance seemed calm and safe. We were prisoners in this world, which despite all our efforts, seemed alien and threatening. I walked up to her, sat down next to her, and hugged her. Silence filled the space around us again, but now it didn't seem so calm. I didn't know what to do, how to get rid of this feeling that we were both missing something, that something was wrong, but maybe this silence was exactly what was saving us at the moment. Time became fluid and strange. It seemed like we were stuck in this house that no longer felt comfortable. Everything around us began to seem alien, and every glance at familiar things made us feel like they were changing, like they were becoming part of something we didn't understand. My girlfriend and I tried not to talk about it out loud, but sometimes the silence was louder than any words. Every day I felt this invisible weight pressing down on me. We couldn't find peace. The girl continued to try to hold on. Her eyes, though full of worry, tried to radiate that familiar warmth that had once so soothed me. But I saw how she had shrunk, how her body had become more tense, as if she were trying to hold on to something that was slipping away. "You disappear more and more," she said one evening as we sat at the table. Her voice was soft, but there was a vague weariness in it. You withdraw into your thoughts. You hardly talk. I sighed, feeling the inner turmoil pushing me toward the closed doors again. I didn't know what to say. Even now, when I tried to understand what was happening, my thoughts remained in the shadows, giving me no clarity. Every time I tried to look at what was happening from a new perspective, something made me turn away, preventing me from moving forward. I don't know what's happening to us, I said finally. Everything feels like a blur. We started looking for answers, and we only ended up more confused. She was silent, and I continued. This house, it's changing. I'm not sure if this is normal. I have a feeling that we're not alone. Her eyes met mine, and I noticed how their gaze became more wary. It was as if she sensed the same shadow I did. Something in the air became thick, and every step we took became cautious, as if we were walking on an unknown edge. I feel like something's wrong here too, she admitted quietly. But I can't stay in this house. I can't be here anymore. Her words were like a blow. I couldn't believe she'd said it out loud. It was what I'd been thinking, but hadn't dared say. The fear that was growing inside her was visible, real like a shadow haunting us. But what was that fear? And what were we really afraid of? We can't just leave, I tried to speak calmly, though I could feel the panic rising inside. We can't just leave all this. We can't run away from what's happening. She stood up, walked over to the window and looked out at the night, covering the world with a dark blanket. I looked at her profile, at her tense posture, and suddenly I realized that we were both holding something inside us that couldn't be put into words. It was as if there was an invisible wall between us, behind which something was hiding. You don't understand. Her voice was low and hoarse. I don't want to wait for something to happen. I can't stay here and watch us both collapse. I felt everything around me freeze. The fear that had only seemed like a feeling to me recently suddenly became a reality that couldn't be ignored. We were standing on the brink of something, and at some point I realized that maybe we were both too tired to fight. We were trying to control something that was beyond our power. The silence was deafening. All the tension that had built up between us came out in that moment. We weren't ready to face what was inside. We couldn't admit it. We were alone again, standing on the threshold of the unknown, with no idea how to live, what to do, or what was really important. I looked at the girl. Her face was tired, and her eyes were full of tears that she was trying to hide. But I knew that she was going through something more than just fear. She felt the same shadow as me, and her inner world was starting to crumble. You're not alone, she said, but it sounded like she was speaking to herself, not to me. You're not alone. We have to get through this together. Her words were a feeble attempt to bring us back to our normal reality, but I knew I couldn't go back there. We were both on the brink of something, and it wasn't a fight with external enemies. It was a fight with ourselves, with something we couldn't understand and that continued to consume us. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were both becoming more vulnerable with each passing day by hiding our fears and not acknowledging what was happening. The morning brought no relief. I woke up to something quietly moving in the air, as if an invisible hand was touching my face. I sat on the bed listening to the silence. It was not peaceful. No, it was a silence that seemed to squeeze me in its embrace. Fragments of thoughts floated through my head, but they did not form a logical picture. I got up so as not to be caught off guard. The girl was sleeping next to me. Her breathing was even. But I knew that she also felt the tension that permeated everything around her. No matter how hard she tried to hide her worries, I felt that she was already on the edge. We were both on the edge. It was as if we were playing a game where no one knew what the rules were. I got dressed and quietly left the room. I walked down the stairs trying not to make any noise. It was a foggy dawn below, and the world outside the window looked alien, distorted. Everything seemed distant and unattainable, as if I was part of some dream but unable to wake up. I decided to go outside. I was sure that it was there, in this strange silence, that I would be able to find at least one answer. Sighing, I opened the door and stepped into the dark garden. The sky was covered with clouds, and I could not tell whether it was raining or just a fog that did not leave the earth. Walking in the garden, I thought about what had happened in the last few days. All those little oddities that I hadn't noticed before were now becoming obvious. Not only the house, but the whole world around us seemed alien. I remembered old photographs in which my girlfriend and I looked happy, and I thought, what have we lost? Where is that confidence with which we walked through life together? I didn't know, and it depressed me. Suddenly, in the distance, I noticed a moving figure. It wasn't very clear, but I made out a silhouette. My heart trembled. It was a person, someone unfamiliar, who didn't seem to be here. I froze, trying to understand what it was. As the figure approached, I saw a woman. She was wearing a long, dark coat, and her face was hidden under a hood. I couldn't make out her face, but something about her movements seemed familiar, as if I had met her before, but I couldn't remember where or when. She stopped when she saw me, and we both froze for a few seconds. She looked like she knew me, somehow very well, but I couldn't figure out how. "Aren't you afraid?" she asked in a quiet but clear voice. I felt a chill run down my spine. It wasn't just a question, it was a warning, as if she was warning me that my steps could lead to something I wouldn't be able to stop. What should I be afraid of?" I answered, trying to keep my voice calm, but a fire of anxiety was flaring inside me. She was silent, but her eyes, though hidden by the shadow of her hood, seemed piercing. I felt how everything around me froze at that moment. "You must be careful," she said finally, her voice still calm. "Sometimes we look for answers in places where it's best not to look. The shadows of the past, they always follow us. Any place, any time." These words made me freeze. She was talking about something that I couldn't understand, but at the same time, they touched on the very shadow that I had been thinking about for the past few days. The feeling that something was hidden from us, something lurking in the house, in this place, something that could destroy us. "Who are you?" I asked, taking a step forward. The woman took a step back, her figure dissolving into the semi-darkness. She didn't answer. She simply dissolved into the fog. I stood there, unable to move, as if everything around me had become part of some game I wasn't ready to play. When I returned to the house, the girl was already standing at the threshold. She looked at me, and I saw in her eyes the same anxiety that had been haunting me. "Who was there?" she asked. I fell silent. I didn't know how to explain what had just happened, but I realized that this meeting, this conversation with the woman, was an important moment. She had warned me of something that I couldn't understand, but intuitively felt that it was connected to what we were going through. I looked at the girl, then at the empty land outside the window, and I realized I couldn't remain in the dark any longer. I had to find answers. The fog did not disappear. It seemed to creep up on us, and I increasingly felt how the world around me was becoming dull, darkened. My girlfriend and I sat in the kitchen, silent, and this silence became more and more unbearable. I did not know what to say to her, did not know how to dispel this cold that had settled in our souls. It seemed that everything we had talked about before now seemed trivial compared to what was happening. "You look somehow different," she said, her eyes searching for something in me, but could not find it. I shook my head. What could I say to her? No matter how much I tried to hide it, her words hit home. I was different, like I wasn't the same person I'd been just a few weeks ago. We'd both changed, but in different ways. She was grieving her loss, and I was grieving mine. It was like we were trying to move on, but our steps weren't matching. I don't know what's going on," I admitted, deciding it would be more honest than remaining silent. Her face softened, but her eyes were still wary. I could see she was struggling with herself, with what was going on in her head. We both didn't know how to get out of this, but we were trying to stay close to each other. "You can't be like this," she said, her voice soft, but there was more to it. The tone in which she said the words made me tense. "We're in the same boat, you know." I nodded, but her words cut me like a knife. We were in the same boat. Or were we? I wasn't sure. Everything changed when I was confronted with thoughts that had never even crossed my mind before. These strange events, the woman in the garden, her warnings, all of it sounded like a sign, like a cry for help. But I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do with what was tormenting me inside. Maybe you should talk to someone, she suggested. I looked at her. Her gaze was full of concern, but there was also worry in it. Worry that I wasn't coping, that I was getting lost in all of this. I didn't know what to say to that. What can help when you can't find the answers inside yourself? I already tried, I said, and all my fatigue was in those words. It doesn't help. She was silent, but I saw her face distort with worry. I felt that something was changing between us. She tried to find me in this labyrinth, but I was already far away, beyond her reach. Maybe we need more time, she said quietly. Just a little time to figure out what was going on. I didn't know if I was doing the right thing, but I felt like it was the only way. I needed to figure myself out, to find the reason that was destroying us before it destroyed everything completely. I couldn't let the fog of this world swallow us whole. That day passed in silence, but it was heavy. We both felt the air around us getting thicker, as if we were not only in different worlds, but in different dimensions. When night fell upon the house, I lay down in bed, but I could not sleep. Thoughts swirled in my head, and each one tormented me. I thought about meeting the woman in the garden, about her warning, about how I felt that something was wrong. But what? I didn't know. I didn't know where these shadows led, where my search would lead. I turned on my side, closing my eyes, and suddenly I realized that I could no longer remain in this state. I had to do something, change something. But what? What should I look for? I knew one thing. All this strangeness, this whole atmosphere was not an accident, and I could not continue to live, hiding from what was happening. Whatever it was, I needed to understand. Story 3. My name is Lev, and I live in a secluded house deep in the woods. No, I don't mean that there are any neighbors nearby, or even a small town. That's not true at all. My house is on the edge of the world, where people are rare and life goes on as usual, far from everyone. It takes me about an hour to get to the nearest settlement, if you can call it that, and all around are kilometers of thick, dark trees and tall grass. Here the roads end, and the world seems to disappear into the void. I have become accustomed to this solitude. It is not such isolation that it would oppress me. On the contrary, I like this silence, this peace. After the noisy city and the eternal pursuit of something that never brought satisfaction, I cannot help but enjoy every minute spent in this place. The house is small, old farmhouse. I took it into my possession. I look after it. I neglect the garden. And frankly, this takes up almost all my time. But I like it. I am my own boss. No one imposes their rules, and I can lead the life I like. As for company, I have a good friend, a dog named Aries. He is a huge and kind dog with thick fur and bright blue eyes that always watch me. We've been together for almost 4 years now, and in that time, I've grown accustomed to his presence. He's my only company, and I don't need anything else. But yesterday, everything changed. I came home from a long day of gardening and settled on the sofa, trying to relax. The fire crackled in the fireplace, and the book in my hands gently led me to a world where it was calm. Aries lay next to me, his breathing even and calm, and his heavy body felt like a source of warmth. He had fallen asleep about an hour ago, his soft snores blending with the crackling of the wood in the fire. And then I heard it, barking. At first I didn't pay any attention to it, a sharp, deep sound, like the way dogs usually bark when something bothers them. But there was something strange about it. It broke the silence, penetrated me like a cold. I glanced at Aries. He was still lying next to me, motionless. His ears did not move. His tail did not move. He did not react. It was ridiculous. Aries was always on guard. He reacted to every slightest noise, every movement in the area. But now, he did not even move. I stood up and went to the window. The barking continued. It seemed from somewhere outside, and with each second it became louder and more insistent. It was something strange, almost aggressive. My heart started beating faster. Something was wrong. I pulled back the curtains and peered outside. In the darkness, under the moonlight, I tried to see what was happening, but there was only a shadow in front of me, hidden by the trees. And then it became clear to me. It wasn't just barking. It was something else. Something that was calling to me. Something that demanded my attention. My hair stood on end and a chill ran down my back. It was disturbing the peace of the night. I looked again at Aries, who was still lying motionless on the couch. His eyes were closed, his body still. Nothing had changed. My breathing became ragged, and I moved even closer to the window. The barking continued, even more furious now. And then I saw it. The dog. In the yard. It stood there motionless, its dark fur glistening in the moonlight. It was Aries. I could have sworn it was him. But for some reason, I felt uneasy. I glanced back at Aries inside. He still hadn't moved. He was there, on the couch. I turned sharply and ran back to him. His fur was thick as always, soft under my fingers. I touched it, hoping to find the familiar warmth. But something was wrong. Something felt strange. There was something rough, unfamiliar about the fur. My heart started pounding. I jerked my hand away and jumped to my feet. A strange feeling washed over me. I ran to the window, but the dog outside was still standing there. Strangely, it seemed as if it hadn't moved. Its eyes, those same blue ones like Aries's, seemed empty. Everything became clear. This was not my dog. It wasn't Aries. But how? I stepped back from the window and suddenly realized that something was wrong with what I had just seen, and that's when I felt the air around me grow heavy and cold. Things happened too fast from there. I didn't know what to do. My legs were buckling, and I stood there in the same room, clasping my hands as if they could keep me from panicking. Things were happening too fast for my brain to keep up. I looked at Aries again. He was still lying on the couch, perfectly still, without the slightest movement. His eyes were closed, his body was still. He was dead to the world around him, and I was alone, lost in a fog of terror and doubt. But the dog outside, I looked at it again. I could have sworn it hadn't moved. Its eyes, I couldn't take my eyes off them. They were as bright and distinct as Aries's, but there was no life in them. They seemed soulless, as if their owner were gone and the body was still there. I knew I was right. This wasn't just a random glitch in my mind. This was something much worse. I looked at my dog inside, back at Aries. Was he dead, or was he something else? I tried to find an explanation, but all I felt was anxiety. My hands began to shake as I turned back to the window. Everything was dark outside, and the one standing in the field hadn't moved again, like it was waiting. What if I was wrong? What if it was just another dog like Aries and I was going crazy? It was all too ridiculous to be true, but I couldn't let go of my suspicions. There had to be some explanation. I peered into the darkness, and again I felt the cold creeping over my skin, haunting me. My pulse quickened, and the thought that all this could be some kind of evil did not go away. I walked to the door, looking nervously at Aries, trying to figure out what to do next. What if I approached that dog? What if I was there and saw something I didn't want to see? I knew I was ready to do something to ease my doubts. I opened the door slowly, trying not to make any noise, even though the sound would probably be audible in this silence. I felt goosebumps crawling on my skin, but I opened the door, stepping into the night. Cold air hit me as I stood in the doorway, peering into the dark outlines of the yard. The barking had stopped now, and there was only a drawn-out silence. It was like the air itself had become heavy and full. I took a few steps forward, then stopped. The shadow in the yard remained in place. The dog was gone. Somewhere deep inside, I knew that was impossible. Just a dog standing in the dark, doing nothing. My legs were stuck, and every step was starting to feel unnatural. All I knew was that I couldn't trust what was happening. I took a few more steps, approaching the strange spot in the yard where I thought I had seen the dog. My breathing was coming in short gasps, and my heart was pounding so hard I felt like it was bursting out of my chest. I stopped, and something caught my attention, something I couldn't ignore. It was a sound, a thin whispering sound, like someone talking softly, but I couldn't figure out what it was. My mind, unable to process it, at first decided it was just a hostile wind, but when I heard it again, the rustling, the whispering, I realized it was more than just the wind, and then I wasn't alone. And the second I turned my head, something moved in the darkness, in the very shadows. I felt fear pierce me. My eyes tried to take in every detail, to figure out what exactly was happening. And then I saw that the dog, standing in the night shadow, suddenly moved. My heart stopped for a moment. My legs refused to move, and I just stood there, staring at it, at the dog who was still in complete shadow. But when I looked at it, everything fell into place. This dog was too much like Aries, but it didn't move, didn't respond to me, and suddenly something with a gnawing pain settled inside me. I turned sharply and ran back into the house, trying not to look at the dark outline of the dog that was watching me. But my steps were so heavy that they sounded like a hammer blow. Everything in the house seemed alien and strange. When I returned to the house, everything seemed the same as before. The same gloomy interior, the same simple things that I knew and loved. But something was wrong. Harley, my dog, had somehow disappeared. She was not sitting on the couch, not lying in her usual corner, not meeting my gaze as usual. I listened but did not hear the usual rustling or even her light snore. A state of anxiety slowly but surely began to take over my consciousness. Where could she be? I barely breathed as I walked through the house, checking each room, hoping that she had simply hidden or gone to some corner to sleep. But I could not find her anywhere. I returned to the hall again, leaning against the doorframe, clenching my fists in frustration. There was no time to think about it. Something was pulling me back to the window. I went to the glass again, already knowing that I couldn't help but look. The barking sounds came from the darkness, echoing in my head. But what I saw this time surpassed all my fears. I peered into the night, my eyes beginning to adjust to the darkness, when finally I made out a dark figure at the edge of the yard. It looked like Harley, but something about its pose, its stillness, made me freeze. It was too completely frozen, as if something was preventing it from moving, and it caused an unpleasant feeling in my chest. I couldn't believe my eyes. My hand instinctively reached for the curtain to pull it back a little so I could get a better look. And that's when I realized this wasn't just a dog. This was someone, or something, that had taken the form of Harley. Its fur glistened in the moonlight, but the figure didn't move, didn't respond to the sounds of the night. It just stood there, staring, as if it were waiting for something from me. Fear, like lightning, ran through my veins. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. How was this possible? This couldn't be Harley. It couldn't be hers, but then what? Why wasn't that dog responding to me? My thoughts were breaking. I couldn't stay here without knowing what was happening. My body moved as if on autopilot. I didn't remember running out of the house, or how I found myself in the yard a few seconds later, but the air felt heavy, as if all the silence around me had squeezed in around me. I walked across the yard, unable to stop, my feet hitting the ground with every step. But everything inside me was crumbling. It was almost too much to take in. I headed toward where Harley was supposed to be, where I had just seen that figure. But the closer I got, the more I felt like something terrible was happening. When I finally got there, I saw it. A pink bandana, bloody. At that moment, my consciousness seemed to switch off. That bandana, it belonged to Harley, I knew that. But why was it here, on the ground, in such a terrible shape? With each passing moment, my fear became more and more concrete. I froze, not knowing how to react, what to do. Thoughts swarmed in my head, but they were all lost in a dark cloud of fear and confusion. I was becoming more and more convinced that what I had seen was not just a mistake. In fact, it was not only the dog outside that was not what it seemed. And then I realized that maybe Harley hadn't come home at all. What I'd seen was something else, a being that had taken her form, that had donned her mask and was watching me. And now that I realized it, there was no time to wait. Time was no longer my ally. I felt some dark horror coming. The sounds of the night grew fainter, and I felt something heavy behind me, like breath burning my skin, like something that had been watching for a long time. I couldn't stay here any longer. I had to run. Now. I ran, not thinking about what was happening, just feeling the ground slipping out from under my feet. My body moved automatically without any awareness. Fear and panic controlled my every step. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat, and my breathing was ragged, as if the air was trying to escape me. My legs felt heavy, but I forced myself to move faster, ignoring my fatigue. The sounds of the night, which had once seemed familiar and soothing, now filled me with unbearable tension. The silence around me became so heavy that I did not know how to fight it. I heard every step of my feet, every rustle in the darkness, and it seemed that every sound increased my anxiety. The trees around me rustled in gusts of wind, but it seemed to me that it was not just the wind. There was something following me, and I could believe it without even looking back. I did not dare to look back, because I felt that if I did, I would be in even greater danger. I kept running, not thinking about what was ahead. I needed to get home. This place was my last bastion, my defense. But what if I was wrong? What if the house wasn't safe? What if the horror I felt outside was following me? Thoughts swarmed in my head, but I couldn't put them together. The fear was too strong. When I finally got home, my hand twitched as I tried to open the door. I didn't remember doing it, but once inside, I could breathe a little easier. I closed the door, and a heavy breath, like relief, escaped from my chest. But I couldn't relax. I stood in the dark hall, listening to the silence that surrounded me. But this silence was different from before. It was pressing on me, as if something invisible was standing next to me. Something I couldn't understand. I felt the wall heading towards the window. Everything inside me screamed at me to stay alert, but I didn't know what exactly was scaring me. I peered out into the darkness, trying to make out even the slightest silhouette, even the slightest movement. The moonlight filtered through the thick branches of the trees, and even this small glow made me feel even more vulnerable. I began to doubt my own mind. The shadows I was seeing seemed too clear, the sounds too loud. But when I peered into the darkness, I saw her again. The dog, Harley. I had to be sure it was her, but something was wrong. There was something in her posture, in her movements, alien. I felt it with every sense, but I couldn't put my finger on it. This wasn't the same dog I'd known for so many years. This was different. A memory suddenly flashed through my mind. The pink bandana. I'd never taken it off Harley. It was always around her neck, and I was used to seeing her that way. But the dog outside was wearing the same bandana. No, wait, I hadn't taken it off. That was my mistake. I should have made sure. I looked out the window at the dog again, but she was still standing there, frozen in place. I turned to the couch. Harley was still lying there, as if nothing had happened. She wasn't moving. Her eyes weren't open. I could understand it if she was tired, but right now her stillness felt strange. So strange. I leaned down to touch her fur, hoping to find the familiar warmth that would help me know she was okay. But as soon as my hand touched her body, I felt something was wrong. The fur was too stiff, stiff as straw. It was alien. This wasn't the Harley I knew. I recoiled, my heart pounding in my chest. This was impossible. This couldn't be true. I looked back at the dog outside. Her eyes, those blue eyes, they were desperate, like they were trying to convey some message I couldn't understand. I felt the air in the room tighten, my head filled with thoughts that all boiled down to one. What if it wasn't her? What if everything I knew was a lie? What if that dog outside wasn't Harley? What if it was a creature that had taken her form to confuse me? I took another step towards the window and pressed myself against it, trying to see something, but the shadows only grew longer. My heart was pounding in my ears, and I could feel a coldness filling my body that had no right to be in this house. I turned around to make sure Harley was still there one last time, but there was no one on the couch now. She was gone. I was alone. Alone in a house full of empty walls and something outside the windows that was following me and watching me. I didn't know what to do next. I didn't know what was waiting for me on the other side of the door, and I didn't know who or what was standing there. But I couldn't stay in this house. I ran hard towards the exit. My legs wouldn't obey me, but I couldn't let myself stop. I knew that if I stopped, I would remain in this nightmare forever. With every second, with every step, I felt something getting closer that I couldn't explain, but that scared me more than anything in the world. The anxiety and fear that gripped me did not give me peace. I did not know what to do or where to go. The feeling of panic grew stronger with each passing moment. I went outside, stood there under the cold night sky, and could not understand what was happening. Every sound, every rustle in the darkness seemed threatening to me, and I felt that I was not alone. Was it my eyes, or was there actually something following me? Each step remained uncertain and heavy, as if the ground under my feet was washing away and I did not have the strength to go further. But this was not ordinary fear. This was a feeling that I was not alone, that someone was watching me. I did not know where it came from, but every cell in my body told me that I was not mistaken. I remembered the dog standing by the window, or more accurately, the wrong dog, the one inside. What was this creature that took her form? And why did I still not understand where Harley was? I tried to find an answer to this question, and my thoughts returned again and again to the moment when I felt that something was wrong. Harley was acting strangely, as never before. This was not her usual pose. I knew every detail of her behavior, but now everything was different. There was something wrong in her movements, in her eyes. I could have decided that all this was just a hallucination, if not for one thing. When I touched her fur, I realized that it was not her. It was something else. But I could not believe it. I continued to struggle with myself, trying to find a rational explanation. After all this was impossible. I did not believe in the supernatural. I was not ready to perceive something that could disrupt my perception of reality. I was an ordinary person, and such things do not happen in the lives of ordinary people, right? I went back into the house and looked around the room again. Everything was quiet, too quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I looked around, trying to find at least some trace that would confirm my suspicions, but there were no traces in the house, no unusual signs. It seemed like everything around was just a figment of my imagination, but I knew that it was not. As soon as I touched Harley, I realized that not everything that seems is real. What if that thing in the woods wasn't just a dog? What if it could take on any form to mislead me? My head kept filling with these thoughts, each one bringing more fear than I could bear. I tried to talk to myself, to convince myself that everything I was experiencing was just my mind creating illusions in moments of fear. I tried to clutch my head in my hands, but even that couldn't calm me down. I was scared, and I didn't know what to do next. But now, standing in the empty room and listening to the silence of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. I went to the window again to look outside. The darkness was still as thick, but now I saw something that made me stop. A shadow. A large, tall shadow moved between the trees. I couldn't make out its shape, but something in its movement told me that it wasn't just a shadow from the branches. It was something alive, something that was following me. I felt my heart stop for a moment, and an unbearable anxiety overcame me. I couldn't stay here any longer. With each passing moment, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I ran out into the street and ran again, but now I didn't know where. I didn't know how to get out of this situation, out of this trap I had fallen into. I was alone, and the thought overwhelmed me. If I don't find an answer, if I don't understand what this creature is, I will remain in this nightmare forever. My steps were uncertain. Every sound around me seemed like a threat, and with every new step, I felt like I couldn't go back. I kept moving, but my thoughts were confused. I tried to figure out what to do, but I didn't know how to cope with what I saw and felt. I found myself on a familiar road, but now everything seemed different. The evening forest, which once seemed so familiar and calm, was now full of shadows and fear. Something was following me, and I couldn't figure out how to get rid of this feeling. I kept walking, and no thought could help me. And then I realized that this horror could not be avoided. Everything I knew was in question. I didn't know what to do. But one thing was certain, I couldn't stay here. The fear and uncertainty continued to haunt me, but I knew I couldn't stop. My body moved as if in some endless nightmare, and my mind still couldn't find any logic in what was happening. The fear wouldn't let go, and the shadows around me became more and more alive. I didn't know what it was, just the feeling that something was following me, lingering in the air, threateningly hovering like a barely audible whisper. All my attempts to understand, to find an explanation, brought nothing but more confusion. My gaze kept drifting toward the trees as if I expected there might be something hidden behind each trunk that I wasn't supposed to see. All I knew was that I had to get out of here. But where? How? I didn't know which direction to go. I was alone, and this lonely world I once considered home was now a labyrinth with no way out. I could still feel the presence of something. Sometimes it would get closer, Sometimes it would move away, but it would never go away. It was like it was pulling me into some kind of darkness where I couldn't control my actions or my thoughts. The more I moved, the more I felt the space around me shrink. And then I found myself at the old alder tree I'd seen when I first arrived. I knew it was there, but now that I was standing next to it, it seemed different, as if this ancient tree had witnessed everything that had happened to this place, things I'd never understood. I looked up and saw branches that were scraping against each other, as if whispering to each other. The night was too dark, but I clearly felt something glittering in the shadows, something impenetrable and mysterious. I remembered how one day I noticed strange marks on the trunk of this alder, but at that moment I thought that it could just be a trace of lightning or an accidental cut. Now these marks looked like they came from ancient times, as if not only the tree was old, but also what it had experienced. I stopped, not knowing what to do. The whispers I now heard, as if coming not from the branches, but from the ground itself, penetrated me, making me tremble. I turned, but I could not find the source of the sound, and this increased my fear even more. What is this? Why am I here? Everything was wrong here. The ground, the air, everything around me seemed heavier, denser. I felt my nails scraping along the tree bark, trying to find purchase, but I couldn't find it. My breathing was becoming rapid, and I felt the dark, disturbing thoughts again, troubling me. I wasn't prepared for what happened next. The shadows in front of me began to move. No, they weren't just moving. They were alive. They were slowly approaching me, like something inhuman. I tried to take a step back, but my legs wouldn't budge. I felt something invisible pulling me toward this horror. And then, like a nightmare, everything began to seem real. There was no strength to fight it. The shadows did not move smoothly. They slid, snatching the air and penetrating the space around me. My legs seemed not to obey, and my whole body was covered with cold, as if someone had frozen me from the inside. I could not remember how long I stood there watching the shadow, which became more and more distinct. Suddenly it broke into several dark figures, which began to gather, as if someone from the depths of this darkness was calling them. This couldn't be real. It was too strange, even for my mind. I tried to scream, but my voice was blocked by some unknown fear that was washing over me like a wave. And then, when I realized that I could no longer move, the shadows became closer. They surrounded me like one large, ominous shadow, ready to swallow me. Suddenly, all the shadows jumped on me in a single impulse. I felt them pierce me, and everything around me went dark. At that moment, I realized that this was not just fear. This was reality, a reality that I could not fight, that had long since come for me. Story 4. My shift started like any other. I'd been working the night shift at the supermarket for months now, and all those nights had been one endless routine, with the only real events being the occasional appearance of an old lady with expired coupons or a teenager trying to sneak beer through the self-checkout. I wasn't complaining. The pay was good for those nights, and it wasn't much of a mindset, so much as a temporary stop while I tried to figure out what to do with my life, a bridge between before and after. But last night, it wasn't like any other. Mr. Thompson, our manager, handed me a laminated sheet of paper and told me to read a new list of nighttime rules. "Don't break these, and you'll be fine," he said. I glanced at him but suppressed a smile. He often made up strange rules just in case, and this seemed to be one of them. But something in his voice today made me pause. The sheet was old, the edges were dog-eared, and the writing seemed very casual, as if it hadn't been read for years. I started reading. The rules were absurd. For example, don't go out to get trolleys after 11:15 p.m. Weird, but no big deal. Security cameras malfunction between 11:30 and 11:45 a.m. Do not attempt to fix them. Okay, not a disaster either. Our video cameras are constantly glitching. But there were some weird moments that made me a little wary. If you hear someone whispering your name in the frozen food section, do not answer or turn around. If a child appears in the store after 12:30 a.m., do not approach them. They are not lost. And finally, the weirdest, if a customer asks to buy raw meat and milk after 1:45 a.m., refuse. If they continue to insist, say that the item is out of stock and leave the checkout immediately. Of course, I thought it was crazy and wanted to laugh, but Mr. Thompson just shook his head dustily, as if this was really something important. I tried to ignore it, pocketed the paper, and kept working. But the strange feeling lingered as I prepared for another night of work. At 11:15, I had my hands on the door, ready to dash out into the parking lot and collect the last of the carts. I knew I had to do it by the book, but something gave me pause when my phone vibrated. A text from Mr. Thompson. "Drop the carts, now!" I froze. My gaze slid across the lot. The carts were there, as usual, tucked into the ground under the dim light of the streetlights. And then I noticed something odd. One of the carts had shifted slightly, just an inch, as if something invisible had pushed it. Wind? No, it wasn't there. I slowly walked back inside and slammed the door behind me. 15 minutes later, the camera started malfunctioning, just like the rules said. The screens began to flicker. Black and white noise filled the space. And then a figure appeared on the screen, tall and strange, standing in the cereal aisle. I froze, staring at the screen, trying to make out what was happening, and as if on cue, it moved closer. Suddenly, the screen jerked and the figure disappeared, as if it had dissolved into the darkness. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. At midnight, he appeared, a man in a black hoodie standing right at the entrance. He didn't make any purchases, didn't move. He just stood there, and I couldn't take my eyes off him. It was as if he knew I was watching, and he wasn't going to leave. I shuddered. I went back to the checkout, but my breathing was shallow, and my heart was suddenly beating faster. At 12:30, a child appeared in one of the aisles, a boy about 6 years old with tear-stained eyes. He looked like he had just been lost. "Mister," he said quietly, "I can't find my mother." My stomach immediately clenched. I didn't know what to do, but everything inside me screamed for action. I tried to offer to help him, but when he looked up, I noticed that his eyes were dark and impenetrable, like two black mirrors. Not his eyes. I felt a shiver run down my spine. He still stood there, staring, and I said nothing. Then his voice became cold and hard. "I need you to hold my hand." His face twisted into a cruel grin, and without realizing why, I turned away. At 1 a.m., the intercom crackled and I rushed over to it, my heart pounding, because I knew for a fact that an intercom was never supposed to work on its own, especially at that late hour. And as I approached, a voice said in a way that made me shudder, "Honey, I need you to let me in. Please, baby, I'm outside the pantry." A voice I never expected to hear because my mother had been dead for 5 years, and the realization hit me like a cold blow, and I grabbed the counter trying to figure out what was going on, and panic flared in my mind at the same time. But before I could even turn around at 1:45, a man showed up in one of the aisles trying to buy a raw steak and a gallon of milk. And when I refused the sale, he smiled in a way that his teeth looked sharp as blades, and there was something sinister about that smile. Like his teeth weren't real, but part of some nightmare that hung over this place. Then at exactly 2:30 a.m., the lights in aisle 7 started flickering, first slightly, then furiously, until they finally went out completely, which was my signal to leave the store immediately. And without wasting a minute, I grabbed my keys and ran without looking back, trying to shake off the feeling that every moment here was becoming more dangerous. As soon as I was outside, the cool night air hit me, and I felt a shiver run through my body. But no words could explain why I was so afraid, because that was when I was reminded that the next evening I would have a new coworker named Jason. And I remembered Mr. Thompson saying that the last guy who worked with me had disappeared, and the list of rules found in his locker had become something of a curse for me, to be followed at all costs. Jason, skeptical, had laughed at the rules, and at 3 a.m., he was breaking one of them by looking at his reflection in the freezer door. And as soon as he saw it, he started screaming silently, clutching his head, and his reflection, instead of repeating his movements, smiled, stepped forward, and, like a living creature, sucked him into the glass. And I watched as Jason disappeared, his presence dissolving in the same flickering as the strange images on the cameras. And then, when he seemed to turn and look at me, I couldn't help but panic, and I ran, realizing that the rules Mr. Thompson had been so insistent on following had become my only defense. Now I understood that each of these indications was not accidental. And although I wanted to run away, my inner voice said that I should stay to find out what was happening, but fear said otherwise. I looked back, seeing how the night supermarket, this deserted, ominous labyrinth filled with strange shadows and ominous lights. And then I realized that every sound, every strange detail was a warning that could not be ignored. And I understood that the rules, they were only there for my safety, to protect me from what lurked in the depths of the night, from what might come and take me away if I dared to break them. Now I was running without looking back, thinking that maybe I was already too late. But I needed to understand what was happening before this whole nightmare consumed me. And every word, every warning echoed in my head like the voice of the past, which was now my future. And I couldn't stop feeling the flame of anxiety flaring up inside me. And I knew that if I didn't find the answer, if I didn't find out what was behind these strange rules, I would forever remain a prisoner of the night. An ominous shift where every sound, every shadow, every flicker of light was a reminder that my life now belonged to this place, this supermarket, and I could no longer run away from the reality that seemed to be crumbling right before my eyes. As the night went on in the supermarket, I became increasingly convinced that the rules written on that old piece of paper were not just a set of insane instructions, but something far more sinister, something that could protect me from whatever lurked in the shadows of this place. I walked down the empty corridors, feeling how every flickering lamp, every quiet rustle became a harbinger of something bad. And in my mind, Mr. Thompson's words constantly echoed, the same voice that told me to follow the rules, as if they were the last line between normality and chaos. And I tried to follow them, although doubt and fear raged inside me. Because with each new moment, something strange happened. First, I noticed how one of the shopping carts in the parking lot began to move for no apparent reason, as if an invisible force had gently pushed it, and that was only the beginning. Then at 11:30, the CCTV monitors began to malfunction. In distorted images, strange silhouettes, sometimes barely discernible, appeared on the screens. Then suddenly, in sharp contrast to the ordinary, and I couldn't tear my eyes away, feeling a chill run down my spine, because it seemed that this surveillance system was not just a technical necessity, but some kind of window into a world that I was not supposed to see. Then around midnight, a man in a black hoodie appeared, standing motionless at the entrance, his gaze empty, his movements almost absent, and I felt my heart begin to beat wildly, as if warning me of an impending threat, and this was not an ordinary employee or a customer, but something alien, unnatural. At 12:30 in the candy department, I came across a small child whose appearance was striking in its unnatural pallor and eyes full of terror. He was crying quietly and begging me to take his hand. But at that moment, my internal warning screamed that I should not approach this creature, that his presence was another anomaly that the rules forbade. And I, feeling horror, turned away, not understanding how such a sight could appear in this place where every detail had to correspond to the usual reality. Then, at exactly 1 the intercom crackled, and the voice that sounded was similar to the voice of my mother. But she had died many years ago, and this voice, filled with pleading, sounded like an omen, as if the past and the present were merging, to remind me that here, in this nightmare, there are no clear boundaries between reality and illusion, and I stood there, panic-stricken, not knowing how to react to this incomprehensible phenomenon. Sometime later, around 1:45, when a customer approached me with the intention of buying raw meat and milk at the same time, I, following the rules, refused, and his smile, sinister and unnatural, with his teeth sharp as knives, made me feel that his intentions were far from benevolent, and I felt an internal chill creeping over me, making me doubt that all these rules could really protect me. At 2:30, the lights in aisle 7 started flickering, at first barely noticeable, then abruptly went out, and I realized that it was a signal that if I stayed, I would not be able to escape the inevitable. And I was forced to leave the store, running outside without looking back, although every cell in my body was screaming that I should have stayed and found out what was going on, but fear won out. Then the next evening, when a new colleague was assigned to me, and I asked Mr. Thompson about the reason for the increase in staff, He, with a look of vague displeasure on his face, informed me that the previous employee had disappeared and that the very list of rules had been found in his locker. And I couldn't help but feel that not only my safety was now at stake, but the man's own life. And at that moment, my new colleague, Jason, deciding that rules were stupid, deliberately broke one of them by looking at his reflection in the freezer door and soon began to scream madly. And his reflection, instead of repeating his actions, smiled, stepped forward and pulled him into the glass, leaving me in complete terror, and I ran, knowing that every word of the rules, every warning, not just a joke, but a warning necessary for survival in this late-night supermarket. And now, as I ran into the darkness, I felt that every moment here was a struggle between the ordinary world and what was hidden beyond it. And I knew that if I did not follow the rules, I could become the next victim. And even though my salary had increased to $45 an hour, I realized that this money was not worth losing my life in this nightmare, where every violation of the rules could lead to irreversible consequences. And in this endless night, among the flickering lights, creaking doors, and strange shadows, I continued to run, clutching my keys and phone in my hands, listening to my rapid breathing, and trying to find at least some kind of protection. Because I understood, here in this late-night supermarket, the rules are. They are only for my own safety, and I must follow them, even if fear rages inside me. Even if the world around me turns into a labyrinth of shadows and mysteries, where every sound, every flickering light on the monitor is a signal that danger is already near, and I cannot afford to doubt. I must run, I must listen to the warnings, because only in this way can I save myself from what lies in wait for me in this dark, ominous world, where rules become the only protection from chaos. And I continue on my way, gripped by fear and determination, knowing that every word on that piece of paper, every instruction from Mr. Thompson is not just absurdity, but a vital warning. And I continue to move forward despite all the horrors, knowing that only by following these rules can I save my life in this nightmare. As I walked down the hallway yet again, the tension in the air became unbearable. The sounds of footsteps echoed in the empty passages, and the further I went, the more I felt like something invisible was watching me. The lights began to dim, and then one by one the CCTV screens began to go out, leaving me alone with those strange shadows that seemed to be getting closer. I heard rustling sounds as if someone was nearby, but when I turned around, there was nothing. Like the moment I noticed a door that had never existed in this building before. Its precise outline, its unnatural smoothness, the strange tint on the glass, all of it immediately made me feel trapped, as if I had crossed over to a side of reality where logic no longer worked. My breathing became heavy and my eyes couldn't tear themselves away from that door, which now seemed to be the center of everything that was happening. Suddenly, I heard a faint knocking, and before I could do anything, the door abruptly opened. I stood there, paralyzed. It was dark inside, but I felt that there was someone behind the door. Somehow, intuitively, I understood that this place was hiding something terrible, something that defied explanation. Suddenly, a silhouette appeared from the darkness. Its outlines were unclear, but strangely familiar. I could not understand how this person was familiar to me, or was it even a person? The fear I felt was so strong that I could not take a single step. The wall around me seemed denser and denser. Each breath became heavy, and the one standing in front of me was slowly approaching. I felt the cold penetrate into my bones. My head started spinning and everything around me became unreal. A person, or something, raised a hand and pointed at me, but not with words. Its gaze said everything. And in that moment I realized that I was not alone, that I had perhaps never been alone here. The fear intensified and I tried to move away, but my leg did not move, as if the ground beneath me was becoming viscous, and I began to sink, as if into a swamp, unable to get out. When I tried to scream, my voice did not come out, and this silent silence became my only companion. In that moment I realized that the doors, the video surveillance, the anomalies, none of this was accidental. All of this was part of something much bigger, and I perhaps became part of it. That night I realized that if I was going to learn the truth, it would be at the cost of myself. As everything went dark and I lost my sense of ground, fear turned into something else. Not panic, but awareness. I could no longer comprehend that the reality I knew existed at all. And though warnings sounded in my head, not to look, not to believe, not to approach, I stepped forward anyway. It was like a wild temptation, a pull toward the unknown, despite all the internal alarms. I didn't know what to do, but the feeling that I was caught in something bigger kept me going. I was in some other space. The walls were gray and peeling, and there was a chill in the air. I felt like I was in a supermarket again, but everything was strange, distorted. The place no longer felt like a store, and it was unclear what was real. Empty shelves, dimmed by the lamplight, held things like forgotten memories. Milk that would never go bad. Bananas that would never rot. It was as if nothing should have been there, as if the place itself had been made to hold something incomprehensible. And then I saw him, the man in the black hoodie, standing just as he had the night before. He was right there, right at the entrance. Again, I couldn't look away, couldn't move. He wasn't moving. He just stood there, staring. There was no humanity in his eyes, only emptiness. With each passing second, his presence became more threatening, and everything around me began to spin like some kind of nightmare. I could no longer see him as a simple customer or a stranger. In this foggy reality, he was something more. I felt the air become heavy, and the air around me grew colder. Suddenly, whispers began to come from the dark corners. The words were inaudible, but they were there. I tried to move again, but as soon as I took a step, it was as if an invisible force was holding me back. I saw my own uncertainty, my doubt in the man's eyes, and it all became so terrible at once that I felt myself suffocating with fear. He took a slow step toward me, and the shadow that was cast behind him grew stranger and longer. His face was hidden by his hood, but I knew he saw me, knew that he understood somehow. It was like how I had felt the entire time in this store, as if I was part of something I wasn't supposed to know about. Suddenly I heard a noise behind me, and when I turned around, I saw the door that had been closed open again. It was dark inside, but something in me was telling me to go inside. It was more than just curiosity. It was an inner urge, something so strong that I simply couldn't resist. With every step I took, I felt myself being pulled inward by something elusive. As I entered, the door closed behind me with a soft click, and the world as I knew it disappeared again. Everything around me became increasingly blurry, and I realized that there was no turning back now. The walls of this room were made of old bricks, and the floor was covered in dust. It seemed as if no one had been here for centuries, but in one corner of the room stood an old dusty monitor. It was on, and despite its strangeness, I couldn't turn away. It was exactly like those CCTV cameras that work strangely, but this was something else. Images slowly began to appear on the screen. At first, ordinary scenes from the store, and then everything began to distort. Suddenly, I realized that I was watching what would happen next. All these events, all these strangeness, I became a part of them. Then I heard his voice, the same as that moment with the intercom, when it seemed to me that I heard the voice of a loved one. But now it was the same man in the black hoodie. His eyes, his looks, they seemed to penetrate my soul, squeezing out every remnant of common sense. And I knew, I can no longer get out of here. Now I understand that this was my last step, and I could not go back. Everything that happened at that moment was predetermined, and at some point I realized that this horror was not random. It was a part of me, a part of the reality that I had long forgotten. All these rules, strange and absurd, hard as steel shackles, they were not just safety requirements. They were warnings. Warnings that if I broke even one of them, I would end up on the other side, with that shadow, with that man in the hood, the one who watched, the one who was part of these nights, part of the dark hours when everything stopped making sense. I felt my body becoming light again, like it was dissolving into thin air. He was standing right in front of me, and in his eyes I saw a reflection of everything that had happened to me. I could no longer tell where I ended and where they began. Those who disappeared, who did not follow the rules. Jason, for example. I heard him scream when he looked at his reflection in the freezer display case. But now I realized that his scream was not just terror. It was a challenge. He was trying to leave, and they could not let him go. And now this was my test. I realized that nothing could return me to the normal world. I myself had become part of this game. The man in the black hoodie was gone. He had simply disappeared the same way he had appeared. But his presence was still all around me. These walls, this store, this place. I huddled in the corner and tried not to look at the mirror that hung on the wall across from me. It was dark, as if it was swallowing up everything around it. And I knew that if I dared to look at it, I would disappear too. My life would disappear, just like Jason's. I felt my heart squeeze in my chest. With each beat, I lost a little more time. I couldn't tell if it had been minutes or an eternity, but I was sure of one thing. I would never leave here alive. Eventually, I realized that I had become part of what made me see these rules as more than just random instructions. They were protection, the walls of the store that protected me from what was outside, from what I could not understand. I was no longer an employee of the supermarket, not just a person doing his job. I was part of this place, and in that moment I felt that I would remain here, along with those who had come before me and who had not endured. Now I was one of them, and this shadow would follow me like an inescapable companion. This was not just a place, it was a trap. But now that I was part of it, I knew that the only way out was to look into the dark corners where my own fear was, where the shadow of the person who had once been me was. I found myself trying to figure out how to get out of here, but the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I couldn't get out. This place was a trap, not just for my body, but for my mind as well. At some point, it became clear to me that time no longer mattered here. It flew by in a different way than I was used to. Days, nights, shifts, all merging into one endless, dark reality. I remembered how, at the beginning of this night, I had laughed at the strange rules. But now, sitting in this cold store, surrounded by mirrors and empty shelves, I felt that these rules were not just mandatory, they were my only chance for survival. If I broke even one, the consequences would be terrible. The creak of the door made me jump. For a moment, I thought it was just the wind. But there was no wind, and there was nothing that could explain the sound. I looked around. In the hallway, lit by dim lamps, stood a man in a black hoodie. He did not move, just stood there. And again, like before, his eyes were not visible, only a dark shadow under the hood. I felt my breath catch. I knew that if this man spoke to me again, or did anything, I would not be able to stop. I was a part of this place, and I could only wait until they came for me. I heard something behind me. It was a sound, like someone walking through an empty store. I tried to scream, but I couldn't. My voice was fading, like it was being swallowed by a shadow. I stood there feeling something getting closer and closer to me. I knew that if I didn't move now, if I didn't do something, I wouldn't be able to move at all. But the fear was too strong. I was afraid that if I looked in the mirror or broke one of the rules, it would be the end of me. I tried to get out, but my legs didn't seem to obey me. The hooded man stepped forward. I couldn't help but look at him, even though there was only one thing ringing in my head. Don't break the rules, don't meet his gaze, don't talk to him. But it was impossible. He was getting closer, and I felt something inside me breaking. And then he was there, just a few steps away. But that was enough. I realized that I was facing my fear, that which I had been avoiding for so long. I couldn't tear my eyes away from his dark silhouette. He stood in complete silence, and only his breathing broke the emptiness. And then he spoke. "You know what to do, right?" His voice was cold as ice. I couldn't answer. I knew that if I opened my mouth, it could be my last word. But his voice seemed familiar. I couldn't understand where it was coming from. He repeated, "You know what to do." And at that moment, I understood. This wasn't just a coincidence. All of this whole nightmare, wasn't just a game. It was a test. If I broke one rule, I would disappear. I would be part of this night, part of this shadow. Soon silence reigned again, and the man disappeared. But I remained in this place, not knowing how much time had passed, not understanding where I was or what was happening to me. The only thing left was to follow these strange, meaningless rules that seemed to be able to save me. But to be honest, I didn't know if anyone could save me at all. I didn't know how much time had passed. But at some point I realized that I was no longer able to separate day from night. These rules, they became my only guide. Although, frankly, I doubted that they would really help. I followed them because I didn't know what else to do. Everything around me seemed closed, not alive, frozen in some terrible anticipation. Every movement, every word was important. I couldn't afford to make a mistake. But inside me, there was a growing feeling that I wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. I was on the verge of a breakdown, and each new moment seemed worse than the last. All this time, I continued to watch the screen where the cameras were on duty. They were like living eyes watching me. At first, I thought that all these rules were just nonsense. I was sure that they made no sense, that all this could be ignored if you were smart and careful. But now, after so much time, it seemed to me that if I was distracted even for a second, if I forgot even one rule, then there would be no place for me in this world. As if they were watching my every move, as if these rules were not just words, but a real force that could tear reality apart if they were not followed. Several hours passed. Time here was not the same as before. I could check the clock again and again, but its hands moved somehow unnaturally, as if they were stuck in their endless cycle. I kept looking at my hands as if they could tell me something, as if they were my only link to this world. I checked my pockets and noticed that the phone had not worked for a long time. It was simply dead. There was no connection, neither from the outside, nor with any of my colleagues. I tried to do something, tried to find a way out, but the walls were squeezing me tighter and tighter. At some point, I realized that there was no way out of this store. I stood there looking at the same shelves and mirrors, which now seemed alive to me, as if they were watching me. I heard their rustling, their gaze. Time had no meaning here, and even the sound was distorted. I felt uneasy. This feeling became more and more painful. It wasn't just isolation. It was something more. A real trap that I had driven myself into by following the rules. I couldn't escape. I stepped toward aisle 7, trying not to look at the same lights that were flickering, but my footsteps echoed throughout the store. It was a strange sound, echoing in the void. It was too loud, as if the space had shrunk around me, and now every sound was unbearably real. The aisle was dark, as if the sun had never shone here, and though I knew the lights were flickering because they were malfunctioning, I couldn't help but think that there was more to it than that. This place could literally be a prison, and the only way to survive was to follow the instructions, to follow the rules that I thought kept me safe from something much worse. But that didn't calm me. Instead, the anxiety grew stronger. I felt the cold seeping into my bones and the stench in the air was thick, as if with every breath I was inhaling something unimaginably heavy and sticky. At that moment, it became clear to me, I won't be able to leave. This place began to affect me. It seemed to penetrate my thoughts, change my perception. I saw how everything around me lost reality, how reflections on glass and mirrors began to move on their own, as if they had become living beings. When I got there, I stopped, feeling how my heart started beating faster. I had a feeling that I was breaking some rule again, but it didn't matter. I was already in this passage, and all I could do was keep going. I tried to go back, but my legs seemed not to obey me. It seemed to me that I was running, but I remained in the same place. The feeling that I would not be able to leave filled me to the brim. My mind tried to come up with an explanation for everything that was happening, but it did not come. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know how to explain it to myself. When the light in the passage finally went out, I realized what had happened. Everything had happened exactly as it was supposed to. I was somewhere between worlds, between reality and this nightmare. Perhaps I was already a prisoner of this place, and perhaps I would never return home. At that moment, I realized that there was no way out for me. I stood in the darkness, and all I could do was wait. The wait was hard. The darkness filled the space around me, and I felt it squeezing, pressing, surrounding, absorbing. I tried to find the strength to get up and leave, but I understood that this was no longer possible. Here, in this store, time no longer existed. There were no concepts of exit and entrance. Time and space lost their meaning, and I became part of this emptiness. I looked into the darkness, and it looked into me, silently absorbing me deeper and deeper. And I knew I could no longer get out. Time ceased to exist. I didn't know how many minutes, hours, or days had passed. I was sure that if I looked at my watch, it would look like everything else in this place, empty and helpless. Here, in this store, time seemed frozen and space obeyed no laws. I walked down the dark aisle, feeling everything around me become cold and unnatural. My footsteps echoed, and the light flickered as I approached its source, adding to my growing anxiety a sense of impending disaster. I knew that none of this was a coincidence, that something was wrong, but I couldn't figure out how to get out of this nightmare. The posters on the walls, the shelves, the products on them, everything seemed frozen, dead objects that shouldn't exist in the normal world. I felt my head starting to hurt. The horror was so real I could almost touch it. I pressed my hands to my temples, trying to calm myself, but my thoughts weren't getting any clearer. They seemed to be merging into some kind of thick stream that I couldn't stop. I began to feel like no one was waiting for me in this place. I was alone, and even if someone was nearby, I wouldn't be able to explain what was happening. I looked at the cameras. They were watching me, observing, but these weren't ordinary cameras. These cameras seemed to have a life of their own, and I couldn't hide from them. Their dark eyes followed my every move, gnawing at me, making me feel vulnerable and helpless. They weren't just filming what was happening, they were becoming part of the horror that was growing inside me. The walls, the ceiling, the floor, everything was part of this space that was haunting me. I moved on, but now my steps were timid, almost like those of a man who realized that perhaps it was too late for him. Why was I even here? What should I do? How to get out of this nightmare? These questions tormented me, but there was no answer. I felt a shadow looming over my every step, my every decision. I turned around, and for a moment it seemed as if someone was standing behind me. My stomach clenched. I quickly turned around, but there was no one. And then I realized that all this emptiness was not just an empty store. This was not just an empty space. It was alive, and it was watching me. I began to move faster, looking around, not knowing what exactly could be lurking in the shadows, what could be waiting for me around the corner. I did not want to go in the direction where I thought the exit was, because I knew that if I went there, I would not return. All I knew was that I had to keep moving, and looking for answers, even if I didn't know what I was looking for. Time must have passed, but I still couldn't figure out what was happening. I knew one thing: I couldn't stay in this place. Something was wrong, and I was a part of something much bigger than just the night shift at the store. Story 5. That evening, I was bored as never before. A typical quiet weekend for our small town did not promise anything unusual. We were sitting in a room of one of our friends, and even the good old movies that we usually watch suddenly seemed incredibly boring. It seemed that life had frozen in this unremarkable town, and the only thing that could somehow amuse us was another crazy adventure. We were young and could not find anything else to do except think about how to make this evening at least a little brighter. I was sitting on the couch, putting my feet up on the table and looking at the guys who kept discussing where we should go. They were strange, funny, and always got into some stupid situations, but how I loved them for it. We had been friends since childhood, and now that I was 18, we were united by even stronger ties. "I'm bored as hell," Joseph said, throwing his cigarette out the window. He was always the one to start a mess. There was already a fire in his eyes for something out of the ordinary. There wasn't a party he didn't manage to cause chaos at. I knew that once he thought of something crazy, everyone would follow. "What are we going to do?" Kyle asked. He was sitting on a chair reaching for his beer. "We've been hanging out at my place, and nothing's happening. It's a dead end. We have nothing here except boring movies and boring conversations." "I know," Joseph suddenly jumped up. "There's an app that takes you to haunted places. It's real. Let's go." I glanced at his phone and saw a strange app where it seemed like you could choose different locations with ghosts or mystical events. We were bored with regular nightclubs or pubs, and as usual, we didn't think about safety or consequences. We were young, and fears, if they arose, were quickly forgotten. It was a game. "It sounds stupid, but let's do it. We have nothing better to do anyway," my fiancé said. He is usually reserved, but in these moments, when it came to adventure, he could not resist. We got into Kyle's car. He was the most responsible of us, and his was the only car that didn't break down every week. The usual banter and talk about what was to come quickly disappeared as soon as we left the city. He punched the address into the GPS, and the car sped off into the night, leaving behind an empty road and stars in the sky that gradually disappeared as we drove further and further away from the city. The drive seemed endless. I sat in the back seat, hugging my legs and looking out at the night landscape. It was like a horror movie. Fields, dark trees, and that indescribable moment when you realize you've driven too far from the familiar world. Time passed and the noise around us grew quieter, only the car's engine breaking the deathly silence. An hour later, we arrived at a strange place, an old cemetery, abandoned, covered in dirt and devoid of any life. In the darkness, the graves seemed even more ominous than they actually were. The stones were covered in moss, and the tombstones were long since weathered and blackened by time. At first, I thought it was just another one of those old, forgotten sites you see along the road, but I still felt a strange sense of unease. "So guys, is this place haunted?" Kyle asked with a smile, trying to make the moment less scary. But I was in no mood for jokes. I felt something growing inside me, either fear or something else that I couldn't explain. Joseph smiled as he pulled out his phone, turned on the app, and immediately it began making strange sounds. We began walking along the old graves, the dim light of our cell phones illuminating our path. At first it was boring. No ghosts, no mysterious signs. But after a few minutes, the app suddenly began to hum and emit static, and then it said a word that made my heart stop. "Here." It was strange because we hadn't chosen any specific destination. We were just walking through the cemetery like kids looking for an adventure. Kyle squinted and looked around, but didn't notice anything. "What the hell?" he muttered, continuing to walk. The app didn't usually give such precise directions. We turned right as the voice instructed, and soon found ourselves in a place where the darkness seemed thicker than in other places. My anxiety was growing. I tried to suppress it, telling myself that it was just a game, but something in the air was off. We continued walking, occasionally teasing each other, but I no longer felt so relaxed. "Keep walking," the app said again, and I froze. Something was wrong. I started looking around, trying to figure out what was going on. We were walking between the graves, and the air was getting colder and damper. Suddenly, in the darkness, I felt something strange, like someone was watching us. My heart skipped a beat, and I almost didn't notice how we continued walking, forgetting about the conversation. Someone seemed to be with us in this place. "What the?" I whispered, feeling fear envelop me. We walked on, but in my soul I felt more and more that we had made a mistake. The deeper we went into the cemetery, the more we felt a growing sense of unease. Each new word spoken through the app seemed to make the place more real, sinister, and cold. We walked among forgotten graves, and the dark shadow thickening around us seemed to become denser with each step. At first it was funny, just a game. But now I felt how this game was no longer so harmless. The dark stones, weathered by time, stood like old guardians, and the gravestones were leaning, with only old moss peeking out through the cracks. The whole scene reminded me of scenes from old horror films, but we weren't on the screen. We were in this place, among these graves, surrounded by an emptiness that couldn't help but be frightening. "Well, let's choose a different app next time," Kyle said mockingly, his voice sounding nervous, as if he himself didn't believe the words he said. I could see how his jokes were losing confidence, and his face darkened slightly. It seemed like time slowed down in this place. We continued walking along a narrow path, illuminated only by the weak beams of our phone flashlights. Ahead, almost hidden from view, was a large abandoned chapel. With every step I took, I felt the overwhelming feeling of emptiness intensify. This world, separated from reality, seemed infinitely alien. I don't know, guys, doesn't it seem weird to you that this app is leading us further and further? I couldn't help but ask. My hand instinctively squeezed the phone, and I felt my hands starting to get cold. At this point, even Kyle, who always seemed fearless, fell silent. He couldn't help but sense that there was some kind of danger in the air. Joseph, still walking, glanced at the screen of his phone. "It's just an app, don't worry," he said, but his voice was unnatural. I noticed his eyes darting around the darkness, and his steps were quick, almost nervous. It wasn't his usual confidence. "Keep walking," the voice came from the phone again, and I froze. We had come to one of the oldest parts of the cemetery. These weren't just graves here. They were real monuments to time. Many of the headstones were askew, and thick trees leaned over them, their roots growing through the stones, as if nature itself was trying to swallow the place. I tried to force out a joke to lighten the mood, but nothing I said could take away the chill I felt in the air. Maybe we should go back, I suggested, my voice hesitant. It was weird, but I couldn't shake the thought that kept haunting me. The feeling of anxiety was growing, and I knew that something was wrong with this place. But the guys seemed too busy. Kyle, Joseph, and my fiance all kept walking, oblivious to my anxiety. Suddenly, the app made another weird sound, as if someone on the other end of the screen was fiddling with the hardware of a phone, and a distorted voice rang out. "You're right." Joseph looked at us with a smirk. "Do you think we should go that way?" he asked, pointing toward a path that led deeper into the cemetery. Kyle shrugged and turned first, not realizing that this place would be our last step on this night's journey. We walked down the dark path, covered in a layer of rotten leaves and dirt. I was getting more and more creeped out, but I didn't want to seem scared. As I followed them, I felt my heart begin to beat faster. The graves here looked strange. There was not only moisture in their stones, but also something that made it feel like they were watching us. Time seemed to stretch out. I tried to catch myself thinking that I shouldn't be afraid, but the sounds of the dark forest behind us did not give me peace. After walking a few more steps, we found ourselves at the very edge of the cemetery. In the distance, where the darkness seemed almost absolute, the forest began. We all stood, looking around the place, as if not understanding where to go next. "Turn around," said the voice from the app, and at that moment it seemed to me that someone was whispering it right behind my back. I turned around abruptly, feeling a cold sweat run down my skin. "What is this?" I whispered. Kyle frowned and said quickly, "No, I'm not going there. It could be some kind of trap." He waved his hand toward the forest. However, his voice sounded different, tense. I felt that he was not happy to be here either, but we didn't have time to leave. At that moment, as we began to turn around, something strange happened. I noticed movement in the dark shadows hidden from our eyes. The forest seemed to be hiding something, something alive, crawling, formless. "Faster!" Joseph shouted, and we ran back along the same path we had just taken. We couldn't explain what exactly scared us, but we all understood that fear had seized us. We couldn't explain what it was, but the forest seemed to come alive. As we panicked back to the car, the air seemed even thicker, and our breathing became loud and unnatural. We ran into the car, closing the doors as if we wanted to hide from something invisible that could catch up with us. It seemed that all I could feel was the emptiness that was following us, leaving no room for calm. Kyle jumped out of the car, and I felt the door shake under his hands. He quickly got behind the wheel, and the car screeched away from the place that we thought would forever remain in our memories as something obscurantist. The interior was dark except for the dim light of the dashboard. We all remained silent, not knowing what to say. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't just running away from something. We were running away from an unimaginable threat that was chasing us from the dark forest. "Damn it," Kyle muttered, pressing on the gas. The car jerked forward, leaving this strange place, but the air around us remained cold, and my heart continued to beat in my chest as if in a crazy rhythm. I looked around, unable to shake off the strange, drawn-out silence. In the dark corners of the car, among the dark shadows, I still felt something watching us. There were no sounds, only a sense that there was more to this empty night than just branches swaying in the wind. Silently expecting something terrible, I looked up. My hand was still clutching my bag, and my back was pressed against the seat. A few minutes later, the outlines of the city began to appear on the horizon, and although I understood that we needed to get home as quickly as possible, anxiety did not leave me. Kyle glided along the road, looking intently at the rearview mirror, as if trying to see something. His hands clutching the steering wheel were white with tension. We were silent, and then I felt it. Faintly at first, then more clearly. It was as if something was scratching my shoulder. My elbow hanging on the back of the seat jerked. I jumped before I could comprehend what had happened. "Ouch! What the hell?" I blurted out. Kyle glanced back sharply, and I followed his gaze. He was looking in the mirror at the third row of seats. There in the darkness, two dots were faintly visible, gradually growing brighter. They were eyes, huge, motionless, sliding across the dark interior. They did not take their eyes off us. I felt a chill run down my spine. This was not a mistake, not a trick of the light. No, there was someone in the car. "Oh my God, Jay, there's someone!" Kyle cried out, his voice shaking with horror. I jumped up in horror, and at some point my husband instinctively pulled his hand away from the back of the seat too. He waved his hand, as if trying to shoo away some ghost. At that moment, something terrible happened. There was a crunch, as if something inanimate, heavy and ethereal had touched him, and the eyes in the darkness disappeared. Without a sound. Just disappeared. My heart was pounding in my chest. I couldn't understand what was happening, but a strange feeling of anxiety and fear had already taken hold of us all. I don't remember how we found ourselves back on the street in the dark night city. Time and space seemed to have compressed, and now we were driving down the familiar road again, but none of us could regain our calm. In cars, you don't get that feeling when your fear becomes so real that you can't get it out of your head. Kyle, his face was pale and tense, as if he couldn't understand what had just happened. He quickly tore his gaze away from the mirror and, without saying a word, turned back towards the familiar road. We all sat in silence, and only occasionally someone tried to squeeze out something like calm. But I could feel it. We were all in some unknown danger that was not limited to this moment. We did not understand what had happened. After a few minutes of silence filled with the echo of our restless breathing, we began to approach my house. It seemed that this whole journey was so long that even the familiar streets that we passed every day seemed alien, as if they had become part of this nightmare that haunted us. At that moment, I felt like someone was watching me. All over the house, in every room, there were eyes like ghosts, like something that had left the cemetery with us was now here. Someone in the dark, someone who was now watching our every move. "We're home," Kyle said, parrying the nervous tension in his voice. He looked at me in the mirror, and in his eyes I saw the fear that could not be hidden. I sat in silence, trying to believe that this was just a nightmare. But in my head there was still one question that I could not let go. What were those eyes? And what did we bring with us from this place? When we entered the house, I knew that our adventures were not over yet. From the moment we returned home, the air felt different. Everything around me seemed alien. Every familiar thing, every sound, every movement that had seemed normal before, now felt like a threat. One question wouldn't leave my head. What did we bring with us? This question hung in the air like a fog that wouldn't go away. We sat in the living room, and despite the silence around us, I could not shake off the feeling that something was wrong. The anxiety still did not leave me. I felt that this fear did not disappear with us, but remained. It was like a heavy, invisible cloud that did not give me peace. Every rustle, every creak, even the slightest sound made me wary. It was something alien, something that did not fit into the familiar world. I sat quietly, observing the room. Everything was as usual, but now I saw it differently. The feeling of the presence of something invisible was unbearably strong. The house, which until then seemed to me a place of safety, now became something strange. It seemed that even the walls began to breathe. I could not understand what was happening. Everything was as always, but at the same time, everything was wrong. A sound caught my attention. Faint, barely audible, but it was there. I listened, trying to figure out what it was. It was some kind of scraping, as if something was quietly scratching along the wall of the floor. At first I thought I was imagining it, but the sound repeated itself. It was persistent, and now I knew for sure that it was coming from far away, from under the floor, where the old wooden beams creaked with age. I froze, listening. Every movement in the room seemed strange and unnatural. I tried to calm myself down, convincing myself that it was just the house making sounds. The old beams, the wind perhaps, but the sound became clearer and clearer, as if something was crawling under the floor, moving, scraping, sharpening its claws. It was too real a sensation to ignore. I felt a chill run down my spine. The silence that fell in the room became heavy and dense. All my thoughts focused on this strange sound. I tried to convince myself that it was just an old house creaking, but this thought did not help. I felt that there was something more to it than just natural noises. It seemed that the house lived its own life, as if it were full of alien forces hidden in the dark corners, under the floor, in the walls. I clenched my hands into fists, trying to cope with the growing fear. Only one thought flashed through my head. What if these were not just sounds? What if this was something that we brought with us from the cemetery? We all experienced something in that place, but only now, here, in the house, I realized that the consequences could be much more terrible than we could imagine. The grinding noise continued, and my heart pounded in my chest. It seemed as if even time had stopped, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I tried to let it go, but the more I resisted, the more I felt this fear wrap itself around me. I began to think that we might have brought something more frightening with us than just the memory of the incident at the cemetery. This fear was alive, and it was here, in this house. My thoughts were interrupted by a sudden surge of tension in the air. Everything around me went silent, as if someone had turned off the sound in the world. The entire situation became tense, and I felt my muscles tense. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something much more dangerous hidden behind this obscurantist silence. I continued to sit motionless, unable to move, although everything in my head was screaming at me to get up and check what was happening. But I couldn't. Then I felt something taking over me. It was a fear that was so strong that it was impossible to ignore. It burned me from the inside, and I could no longer just sit still. I felt like I had to act, but what to do? Everything around me seemed so ordinary and so alien at the same time. No explanation helped. We tried to regain our composure, but we couldn't. I knew that after we found ourselves in the cemetery, nothing would be the same. We were tied to this place. This shadow that followed us was real, and it was getting closer, more insistent. I couldn't understand what it was, but every second I felt its presence, like a physical pressure on my chest. The house that had once been a place of comfort for me now seemed uninhabited, empty and alien. I knew that we brought with us something more than just a memory. We brought with us shadows that would never go away. Several days passed, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Every corner of the house seemed filled with invisible eyes watching me, and although I tried to convince myself that this was simply the result of fear and nervous tension, my inner feelings told a different story. More and more often, I caught myself thinking that something or someone was watching us. Something had attached itself to us that evening in the cemetery. This feeling grew, became more and more obvious, like a shadow that slowly absorbs the light. We no longer gathered together as we used to. It was as if each of us had become a part of something bigger, something invisible, something frightening. We avoided talking about what had happened, but it could not be forgotten. Everything that had happened in the cemetery continued to live with us, sliding through our thoughts like an elusive scent that did not disappear, no matter how strong the wind. I began to notice strange things. For example, doors that I clearly remembered being closed would open by themselves when I walked past. Chairs that were in their places would suddenly appear to have moved, as if someone had been sitting on them and then stood up. But the worst thing was that I began to feel other people's eyes on me, even when I was alone in the room. I tried to ignore these feelings, but with each passing day they became more and more obvious. One evening when I was alone at home, I decided to go through some old things. I needed a distraction, and the mess in my room seemed like a good opportunity to get my thoughts in order. I was rummaging through boxes of papers when I suddenly heard footsteps behind me. At first I thought it was one of my friends, but when I turned around, I saw no one. My gaze slid around the room. Everything was in place, but there was still a feeling that someone was nearby, hiding in the shadows. I quickly returned to my things, trying to focus. But with every sound I heard, be it a rustle or a creak, I became more and more afraid. This house was not the place I once considered cozy. I no longer felt safe, and then I felt it, the cold. It wasn't just the cold of the air, but as if the air itself had become cold, and its flow, as if invisible, touched my skin. I stood up and stepped toward the door to check if the window was closed, but as soon as I approached the wall, everything around me became somehow different. The walls that had seemed ordinary before now seemed alive. I felt them breathing, as if something was hiding in their depths. It was something dark and secretive. It was in the air, in every movement, in every look that I could not control. I turned my attention to the window. There in the darkness, something was moving. It was a barely noticeable movement, no more than a shadow, but it was so distinct that it could not be just a trick of the light. I froze. I knew that if I came closer, I would see something that I would not be able to forget. I could not take a step forward. My mind was screaming at me to leave, but my body was rooted to the spot. Time flowed strangely, stretching and stretching into infinity. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me from the darkness. I took a step back, but each step toward the door was heavy, as if everything around me was resisting. The walls, the air, the room itself, they all seemed alive and unwelcoming. I opened the door and immediately felt the tension leave, although I knew it was just a deception. In the dark corridor, which seemed endless, I noticed that my steps echoed in the emptiness, as if I was not alone. That night I could no longer return to my room. I sat in the living room, feeling the tension wrap itself around me again. Everything was quiet outside the window, but that did not bring me peace. The silence, this dead silence that could not be normal, weighed on me with every passing moment. I tried to pull myself together, but it was impossible to forget that something was watching us. I couldn't figure out what it was, but I knew one thing. It wasn't just a feeling. We brought something with us, something that shouldn't have crossed the line between the world of the living and the dead. We brought a shadow that wouldn't let us go. Every night I woke up feeling the cold in the room. Every morning, starting the day, I felt like something was hiding. Something was hiding. Something was waiting for me to make a mistake. And that mistake would cost us everything. The nights were the hardest. Every morning when I woke up, I felt like the night had left its mark on me. A heavy feeling of the unknown, something that wouldn't let go. As if there was something more than just darkness lurking behind the walls, something alive, ready to break out. The strange events that happened in the house became more and more disturbing. I could no longer ignore these strange moments. I knew that something was wrong in our house. It all started when I noticed changes in my surroundings. Small details that used to seem normal now filled me with anxiety. One evening, I decided to check my room, go through the whole house and make sure that nothing had changed. In each room, I examined the walls, the floors, the windows, as if looking for something hidden that could explain this uneasiness. But I found nothing. And yet, the more I tried to understand what was happening, the clearer it became that I did not understand anything. At night, when everyone in the house had already fallen asleep, I felt that cold again. It was familiar, but now even more insistent. It seemed to penetrate me through and through. I felt how from under the floor, from the walls, from the dark corners of the room, something hidden, invisible, but obvious was rising. In the darkness I heard rustlings, steps that could not be caused by the house alone. It was someone's step, someone's gaze, and I knew that I was not alone. It was impossible to fall asleep. I lay in bed for a long time, not daring to move, but thoughts were spinning in my head that did not give me peace. It seemed that I could not get rid of this feeling, but at some point it seemed to me that something had changed. The shadow in the corner of the room became thick, as if the darkness itself was thickening. I tried to exhale, but the air became heavy. With each breath, it was becoming more and more difficult for me to breathe. I got out of bed and went to the window to open it a little, hoping that fresh air would help me calm down, but nothing had changed. Even the stars in the sky seemed dead, as if they were watching me and not shining. I returned to my room again, but then something caught my attention. In the darkness, right in front of me, I saw a strange figure. It stood motionless, in complete shadow, but there was something clearly dangerous in its presence. I could not see exactly what it was. It seemed to dissolve into the darkness, but I felt it watching me. I froze, unable to move or scream. My muscles were tense with fear. I tried to figure out what this shadow was, but there was nothing in the darkness that I could clearly discern. And then I felt this figure begin to move. It moved to the side, and I saw the shadow grow longer, as if it were stretching, becoming even more unnatural. I knew it was moving toward me, but I couldn't move. I couldn't run. Something in this creature held me captive, freezing my body, not allowing me to scream or do anything. Panic in my head, but my body was mute and motionless. In that moment, I realized that this figure was not just a shadow, but something much worse. She came closer. I could feel her presence next to me, the cold she brought with her. And something inside me screamed that it wasn't just fear, it was awareness. This thing, it was real, and it was coming for me. I couldn't stay here any longer. In some terrible rush, I ran. I don't remember running out of my room and down the hallway. I didn't remember what was happening around me, but I had to get out. This fear, this feeling of being hunted, was burning inside me. I ran as if I was trying to escape something that wouldn't give me a second of peace. As I ran outside, the cold air hit me in the face. I could feel each breath filling me with life, but the alarm continued to sound in my head. I looked around, but I could not find any trace of what I had left in the house. Was it just in my head, or did I really see that creature? I could not tell. My steps slowed, but this fear did not leave me. I stood in the darkness, realizing that no matter where I was, this shadow would still be behind me. It would not go away. We brought it with us, and now it follows us invisibly and everywhere. Story 6. I went back to work just to get out of my apartment. Something had changed there. Subtle little things that were nagging at me. The air felt different, heavier, filled with something foreign. Smells that had always been familiar suddenly seemed wrong. But the worst thing was that she was gone. My cat. I knew she existed. I knew I had pictures of her, dozens, if not hundreds. She was always there, jumping on the bed, curling up in my lap, begging for food. But when I opened the album on my phone, her pictures were gone. It was as if they had never been there. I couldn't even remember her name. Something was wrong, but I tried not to think about it. Work was supposed to distract me. I shelved books, helped customers, acted on autopilot. I hoped that the routine would erase the anxious thoughts. But the day had been strangely quiet, almost dead. The store resembled a ghost town, and Maddie, my boss, had sent me home early. I walked down the street telling myself that everything was fine. Just stress. I hadn't been sleeping well in the last few weeks, and anyway, I might have accidentally deleted the photos. Maybe I just thought there was something wrong with the smells, and the cat had never existed. Hell, even that thought seemed stupid. But I was trying to cling to something until I got home. I put the key in the lock. Or rather, I tried to insert it. It wasn't there. The door was gone. I recoiled, my heart pounding. Where the entrance to my apartment should have been, there was just a wall, smooth, painted the same color as the rest of the hallway, as if it had always been that way. I ran my fingers along the wall and panic flared in my chest. Drywall, a slightly rough surface. There was no sign of a keyhole, no sign of a hinge, just a blank wall, as if the door had never existed. Damn, I breathed out. My heart was pounding so hard it was hurting my temples. I took a step back, looking at this deception. In complete confusion, I tried to remember. Was I sure there was a door at all? Wait, of course there was. I lived here. I slept here, watched movies, drank coffee in the morning. I had a cat. This was my home. I pressed my palms against the cold wall and put my ear to it. At first, nothing, but then I heard it. The sound. It was faint, but it was there. Distant, muffled, breathing, slow, measured, heavy. I froze, trying to process what was happening. It couldn't be someone else's breathing. Behind that wall should have been my apartment, my kitchen, my table, my fucking cat. But there was something else there. I closed my eyes, listening. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Something huge was inside, hidden where my life had once been. I jerked back and looked around. The hallway looked the same as always. Ordinary, dimly lit, smelling of something stale. I'd been here hundreds of times. Everything was the same, except the door to my apartment was gone. I didn't know what to do. Call the police. But what would I say? Excuse me, my door just disappeared. They'd think I was crazy. But if I just left, if I gave in now, what if I could never come home again? I started punching the wall. Hey, this is my house. Open up! Silence. I kicked it, slammed my shoulder into it, desperate to at least feel its unreality. But the drywall was real. At that moment, someone walked past. I turned and met the gaze of a man in his 40s. my neighbor, my former neighbor. You, you see this? My voice trembled treacherously. Excuse me? He frowned. This was my door, my apartment. I pointed at the wall. Tell me you remember it. He took a step back, then another. This is the first time I've seen you. My chest tightened. What? But we said hello when we passed in the hallway. You're walking your dog. It's a small one, with a white spot on its ear. His face remained blank. I don't have a dog, I froze. The air in the hallway seemed to thicken, become viscous. I wanted to say something else, but my tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth, and then he was just gone. I was left alone, standing in front of the wall where my house used to be. And then I understood. I no longer existed. It wasn't just my cat that was gone. It wasn't just my door. I was gone. I sat in the car staring ahead, unable to move. It was hard to wrap my head around how someone could just disappear. How could someone erase an entire life, erase people, memories, things, leaving only an empty space, as if I had never existed? It all felt like a bad dream, and I couldn't wake up. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone. I decided to call my mother. If anyone was going to remember me, it would be her. My heart was pounding as I pressed her contact. One beep, two beeps. Answer. I burst into tears when I heard her voice. The words poured out in a stream, about the missing door, about the cat, about the neighbor who didn't recognize me. I spoke, choking on tears, and she listened. She didn't interrupt, didn't tell me I was going crazy. And then she asked a question that sent shivers down my spine. Are you finally ready to move in with me? She said it calmly, even happily, as if she'd been waiting for this moment for a long time. What? I asked again. Honey, you've been living in the car for too long. You need a permanent place. I'm worried about you. I froze. In the car? Did she think I was homeless? Mom. My voice broke. I lived in an apartment. You know that. You came to visit me. We sat in my kitchen, drinking tea. You petted my cat. She fell silent. A long, heavy pause. You got a cat? There was alarm in her voice. Darling, you know you can't afford a pet unless you have a stable place to live. Everything inside me clenched. Mom, tell me, do you even remember how I moved there? How I signed the lease? What kind of bedding did I have? What books were on the shelf? She was silent, and then, slowly, as if she couldn't convince herself of it, she said, You always lived in the car. My mouth went dry. The world around me shook. I wanted to scream. I wanted to beg her to remember, but something inside me already understood. She couldn't remember, because nothing else existed. I ended the call without even saying goodbye. I just hung up and stared at my phone. My heart was pounding. I opened the gallery, and the photos were really gone. Not just the cats. My room, my things, even the selfie in my bathroom mirror. Nothing was left. I went into my messages, opened a chat with my best friend. We had joked there for years, exchanged memes, teased each other. I knew there had to be our favorite meme there. The silly picture we'd exchanged over and over again. But it wasn't there. Our entire conversation felt different, like it had been rewritten. Panicked, I dialed his number. Beeps, then voicemail. I left a message, probably sounding crazy, but I didn't care. Then I pulled out the business card of the cop I'd met outside his house. He answered right away, almost instantly. You took me too long, he said. His voice was tense. What? I managed to get out. Listen carefully. I can't talk for long. It's not safe. A chill ran down my spine. What are you talking about? Have they found me yet? He asked sharply. Is someone watching you? Who are they? His voice was shaking. Look, I don't care how it sounds. My apartment is gone. Everything I owned is just gone. My friends don't remember me. My mother thinks I've always been homeless. What the hell is going on? There was silence on the phone, then a quiet, tense breath. Okay, remember the address. I wrote it down without even thinking. Come over. Just don't draw attention to it. He hung up. I was left in complete silence, holding the phone in my hands. My head was in chaos. It all sounded like nonsense, like paranoia, like a damn movie. But I knew one thing. If there was even the slightest chance of understanding what was happening, I had to go. I started the car and headed to the indicated place, feeling fear growing inside me. I drove through the city at night, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. The car sped along empty streets, and the further I drove from familiar places, the more everything around seemed alien. Not the same as it had been before. Maybe it was just nerves. Maybe the lighting was different here. But the buildings looked taller, the streets wider, and even the air smelled different. The courtyards I passed seemed too dark, and the silhouettes of the houses too stern and motionless, as if the city itself had frozen, listening to my steps. I caught my reflection in the glass, my face pale, my lips pressed together, my eyes wide open. I didn't recognize myself. I checked the address I had written down, compared it with the map. It was on the outskirts of the city, in an area I had never been to. There was nothing strange about it, just the usual industrial areas, abandoned warehouses, small workshops. But now as I drove there, knowing that a man who knew something was waiting for me, it all looked different. The road was getting narrower. The streetlights were burning less frequently. The silence was becoming thick, dense, hanging. At some intersection, I noticed something strange. The shadows from the streetlights were not moving as they should have. They were shaking slightly, as if something was shifting them. But there was no wind. I pushed it away, told myself I was just tired. Finally, I reached the right place. An old one-story house among the leaning buildings. The headlights illuminated the peeling facade, the door that looked unreliable, and the cloudy glass in one of the windows. I turned off the engine, looked around again. Silence. No cars, no people. Just me in this house. I went out, trying not to slam the door. As I approached the porch, I felt everything inside shrink. It was different here. I couldn't explain it in words, but the air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me. And the light from the street lamp in front of the house seemed a little dimmer than it should have. I raised my hand and knocked. Once. Twice. The door swung open, and a man stood before me. It was the policeman. His eyes were darting around. He looked tired, his face drawn. He pulled me in quickly, slammed the door, and immediately turned the key in the lock. "Did you see anyone?" he whispered. "Nobody was following you?" I swallowed. "I don't know." He exhaled nervously, running his hand through his hair. "Okay, we can't stay here long. They already know." "Who?" I whispered, but he ignored the question, quickly heading deeper into the house. I followed him. The room he led me to was littered with papers, maps, and some diagrams. There was an old laptop on the table, its screen filled with text documents. In the corner, there was a board covered in something I couldn't make out. It all looked like a paranoid lair. He sat down on a chair, grabbed a stack of papers from the table, and quickly leafed through them. "Your name." "You know my name." "Tell me." I gave my name. He nodded, glanced at one of the pages, then pulled out a crumpled photograph. He handed it to me. I looked. It was me, but not me. The face was similar, but the features were slightly different. The hair was not laid the same way. The eyes were a little narrower, as if someone had drawn me from memory, but not perfectly. "Is that you?" he asked. "It's—" I didn't know what to say. It was both me and not me. He nodded again, as if he understood how I felt. "They started this a long time ago," he said. "No one knows how exactly. People disappear. No, they don't disappear. They become non-existent. Their memories are distorted. Their pasts are rewritten. They lose everything. Like you." I was silent, my heart pounding. "What happens to them?" "They become different, or they disappear altogether." He glanced at the window. "They take them. They change them. Sometimes they don't even notice. Sometimes it happens slowly. At first, something small, a forgotten detail, an erased photograph, an altered memory. Then more. You are the first person to reach this stage and still remember that they existed." He looked at me tensely. "And that's a very, very bad sign." "Who are they?" His voice broke. "I don't know," he said quietly. "I just know they're real. They're watching. and they don't want anyone to notice. We froze. All I could hear was my own breathing. "We have to go," he said sharply. "They're close. But how?" "Later. Much later. For now, just trust me." I looked at him. Everything inside me protested. I didn't know this man, didn't know if I could trust him. But he knew what was happening. And if I stayed here, if I hesitated, something inside told me that I would never know what had happened to me. I nodded. "Okay, what do we do?" He grabbed his bag, quickly stuffed the papers into it, put the flash drive in his pocket and looked around. "Through the backyard. There's a car there. Let's go." I felt a chill run down my spine. We walked out into the dark hallway, stealthily moving toward the back exit. I clenched my fists, trying not to breathe too loudly. We opened the door, and then I felt it. An invisible, oppressive presence, like something was looking right at me. We froze on the threshold. The air was thick, motionless, and I felt its weight on my skin, as if something invisible was pressing on me, enveloping me, penetrating inside, gnawing into consciousness, into its very foundation, as if trying to blur me, erase me, as it had already erased my house, my cat, my past. And at that moment I realized that this feeling was familiar to me. I felt it before, when I looked at the door that had disappeared, when I listened to someone else's voice in my favorite song, when my mother said that I had always been unstable, as if someone, something, had been digging around in my life from the very beginning, changing it. But now it was not distant, abstract. It was here, nearby, around, looking straight at me. The policeman, whose name I still didn't know, grabbed me by the arm and jerked me to the side. The door slammed behind us, and I heard a sound. Not footsteps, not a creak, not a rustle, but something deep, heavy, as if the walls themselves had shifted, changed shape, as if the house was breathing. Alive, not just a building, but something bigger, something more ancient. And I realized that if I turned around, I would see him, them. But I couldn't. I couldn't look. I couldn't let them know that I saw them. It would be a mistake, an irreparable one. So I just ran, gritting my teeth, not turning around, just listening to the space changing behind me, flowing like liquid, like something not entirely real, but absolutely, frighteningly alive. We flew out into a narrow courtyard, dark, cramped. There was no car. It should have been here. The policeman swore, looked around, his eyes darting. He looked scared but not surprised, like he'd expected this to happen. Like you couldn't leave anything in one place for too long unless you wanted to disappear. And then he grabbed me by the shoulders and almost yelled, "Do you remember?" And his voice was desperate, demanding. He was shaking me as if it was important. But I didn't understand what he meant, that I had to remember. And then he said more quietly, almost pleadingly, "Do you remember what happened before?" And I wanted to say yes, but instead something else came into my head. What if not? What if my life has always been different and I just didn't notice? Am I sure I had a cat? Am I sure I had that apartment? Or am I just clinging to memories that aren't mine? The policeman looked at me, his breathing heavy, something like fear flickering in his eyes, not of what was behind him, but of me, of what I might say. Before I said no, everything would change. And in that moment I felt them approaching, like a shadow sliding across my skin, like the air thickening around me. And I didn't need to turn around to know. They were here. I did the only thing I could. I grabbed the policeman's hand and ran.